Real Country 550 and 92.9 WAME.
Welcome to Racing Roots with Hamm.
If you don't know our host, David Hamm, he's a 25-year NASCAR veteran, engine builder, and jackman.
Live every Monday evening, we have a new guest
From the racing world with their stories, their paths,
their racing roots. Sponsored by Jersey Cape Yachts.
Now here's our host, David Hamm.
And good evening, everyone. Welcome to Racing Roots with Hamm, live on 550 92.9 WAME. And we're also streaming live on our Racing Roots with Hamm Facebook page and DHammiam on YouTube. So if you'd like to see us live in the Randy Marion studio, you can go on there and watch us there, because we actually got lots of props, or whatever you want to call them, this evening. And the main prop we have is Mr. Bill Blair. Not that I'm calling you a prop, but you know what I'm saying.
I do.
I'm just so excited to have you here. It's ridiculous. I've been excited all week thinking about it.
Well, thank you.
Yes, sir. Always great to see you. I saw you last down at Daytona, Ponce Inlet.
Yeah, racing North Turn.
Yeah, Racing's North Turn.
It's a good deal.
Yeah, that's a lot of history. You just walk into that area, and I feel like I'm almost, I would say stepping back in time, but it's a little bit modernized compared to what it was back then, I'm sure.
Well, with me, David, it brings back memories. Mm-hmm. And I can still visualize and see the guys and the cars and the people, and make chill bumps run up and down my arms, and I just, I love that period of time. And I know you've heard this 1,000 times. That was when racing was racing. Mm-hmm. But things change. We move on. And at some point in the show, maybe we can show a few things that the way it used to be, and you can compare that with what they do now, and it blow your mind. Yeah,
it's kind of like the little video I put together for, so I put a big video together for Will and Will Cronkite, and it'll be showing up here shortly within the next couple of days. But I did post another one, and it shows the lug nuts. And, Will was talking about how they, back in the day with Donnie Ellis in 1975, and they won the pit crew competition. Anyway, I'm getting to the short story of that is that it shows how the lug nuts, go on the stud. And it was the same thing that we used whenever I was a jackman. It was the exact same kind of setup. But now it's totally different. And then 10 years from now, people are going to be like, what was that? That's like ancient.
Well, I go back in the time that they used lug wrenches.
Yeah.
And you ask the average guy off the street today what a lug wrench is, and he won't know.
All right, yeah.
But you know what I'm talking about? It
yes,
looked like this, different sizes on each, a four-way lug wrench, and they would spin them.
Yeah.
And I do remember this, Bud Moore, he was about the fastest there was for the lug wrench.
Oh,
really.
Yeah.
Him and Harry Payne. Harry worked for my dad. But they used to have a competition between the two of them, which was fastest. And Harry worked for my dad, Bill Blair, and, of course, Bud Moore was Joe Eubanks' mechanic.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, but Bud Moore, every time I think about him, I get goosebumps because I think about being around him back in the day. But he was, World War II vet and that type of thing.
There's a lot of history there. I still remember in 1951 and 52, he stopped at a service station. My daddy had a fuel station. They'd be going down to Hillsborough, Occoneechee Speedway, and they'd always stop in there and get gas. And he'd already started fixing shocks, cheating. You had to be strictly stock in the early days, 1949, and he done figured out how to revalve those shocks and make them stiffer. See, the early shocks was knee action. They operated it with a cylinder, and it rotated up and down.
Okay.
Hooked to a joint that was hooked to the axle, front or rear. And then they began to have the enclosed
like
shocks.
a hydraulic type.
And the inside was different size washers with different size holes in it. The smaller the hole, slower it would react,
Yes.
And he figured out how to take them apart and make the holes different sizes, then weld it back together and grind it down and repaint it. And he offered to fix some for my daddy. So and he was charging, wasn't very much to do it, but he said, I'll just fix your set and give them to you.
Yeah.
And see, that way they couldn't say anything about it. If you ground all the weld off and repaint them, wouldn't know you had it apart. So you had to be strictly stock. You couldn't alter anything on the car to begin with.
That was Bill Francis' vision in 1948, I guess, is to do strictly stock division, and he started it in 49.
Well, he did, but actually Russ Catlin and Quinsonbury with Speed Age first mentioned about doing a 500-mile strictly stock race at Indianapolis in 1947, 48.
Okay.
And they said it'd be great for the manufacturers. No, they didn't understand why you should let that speedway sit and only use it one time a year.
Right.
Let's use it twice a year. And they did in their columns there about 2 or 3 times in Speed Age wanting somebody to do that. Of course, AAA, naturally. Of course, AAA was your big guy back then. But I guess that France and some of the others actually picked up from that. That'd be my take on it anyway. And besides, Sheila and I was talking about today how many 39 Fords were made. And why that's a factor in, I'll tell you why. They made 38,039 Fords. And my daddy probably tore up 2 dozen of them. And no telling how many the rest of them were torn up. You know, we run generally 4 or 5 times a week back in those days. And I remember Bill France would run, when he formed NASCAR in 48, started running 2 nights on different locations. Might be some in Georgia, might be some in the Carolinas. But they were just tearing the cars up. And France used to, he and his wife, they used to come by our place, which is an old farm, 800-acre dairy farm, Blair Farm, and called Clover Hill Farms. But they'd sit around the big oak tree and talk. And boys, what we're going to do. And it's getting hard to find a 39 Ford. Everybody wanted a 39 Ford because Raymond Parks, that's what he bought for Red Barn, Fonny Flock, Roy Hall, and Lois C. So it might be monkey see, monkey do. But the 39s also made good liquor cars. The first one to have hydraulic brakes on them. And see, 38s didn't have it, and prior 38s didn't have hydraulic and mechanical. You could push for a week and you still run over something, you know.
Did they have a big trunk?
Well, sort of. But you see the little coupes, you take all the back out of them, and it just opened up into a pretty good sized space. You get 125 gallons on pretty easy. But anyway, they was tearing some of those cars up. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? I know there was a guy named Billy Davis who used to keep his eye out all the time looking for 39 Fords for my daddy. And so I think that led to the Strictly Stock stuff. Because and Bill France did, as I understand, he told my daddy, and they sat around a big oak over there and talked about this, and that he'd asked Ford Motor Company to consider remaking 39 Fords so they have something to race with. And Ford reluctantly told him he appreciated it, but we just wouldn't look good on our behalf to do that. We're in a business to make new cars, but we appreciate you asking. So that never materialized, so hence Strictly Stock. And they ran a test on that deal down in Florida, probably Jacksonville or somewhere in that area, I believe it was, for a few laps. They had a modified race schedule, but they figured they'd just get a few of the newer cars out there and let them run a few laps, see what people thought about it. And so the crowd liked it. So next thing you know, he'd scheduled a Strictly Stock race in Charlotte, that new Charlotte Speedway built by 2 moonshiners from Kernersville, North Carolina. And they got caught with their liquor, and so they lost their lease on that land to the property owner, and then he contacted Bill France and promoted races there. See, moonshine started a lot of this stuff back in the day, and it was a big part of racing was moonshining too. Well, anyway, in the Charlotte Observer, some years ago, I was over there and looking in the library, looking at the papers, and it says that Bill France had run an experiment, and most of the paper was devoted for what Bruton Smith was going to do. At Concords, and it was an experiment. And a little bit about that deal, as I remember, seeing 49, I'd have been 11 years old. I remember a little of it, but see, France, when he come to promote it, Greensboro Fairgrounds and Peace Haven and Fairgrounds in Winston, he'd come stay with us some, and finally got a place on Lee Street in Greensboro. And they moved up there finally, and of course still had the place in Daytona Beach. But see, France moved on up from Florida, started promoting on up what I'd call 95 and Interstate 85. On up to Richmond finally. And he was co-promoting that some with Sam Nunes. Sam was with AAA. Well, my daddy built the track in 47, but my daddy sanctioned with him. But the race at the fairgrounds over there, getting back to that, they sat around the tree and talked about it. And what they're going to do. So he scheduled that race over there June the 19th, I believe it was, and in 1949. And telephone rang one day during the week there, and it was Annie France, and she's talking to my daddy, and I heard him talking to her, and a little bit. Apparently, Bill France got on the phone. But what the conversation was about, she called him and said, "Are you coming to Charlotte this weekend?" My dad said, "Well, I don't have I'm gonna be there." I said, High Point's gonna be there, but I don't have anything to drive. I still got my modified. And she said, "Well, that's what he wants to talk to you about." And you say that the gonna be a big crowd? He said, "Yeah." Now, the reason he knew there's going to be a big crowd, High Point was about 5,000 people at that time, 5, 6, something like that. Mm-hmm. And he had a liquor business, and he sold half of High Point liquor, moonshine.
Yeah.
And so he knew about it. And plus the farm. I mean, we delivered milk all over town.
Yeah.
And the Blair boys, you know, there was 7 of them, and they were everywhere. And they was in the land business and farming and everything else.
Yeah.
So she said, well, the goods said, Bill, meaning Big Bill, he's just worried to death there's nobody going to be there, not going to have enough cars. Of course, people still calling and coming in about it. So how about tell him what you just told me? So she put him on the phone, and Big Bill asked my daddy again, said, are you going to be in Charlotte? And he said, yeah, I'm going to be there. Well, you don't have anything to drive, do you? He said, no. And he said, well, that's one reason I call you. There's 2 guys here from Great Bend, Kansas. They own a Lincoln Mercury dealer. And they brought 2 Lincolns, and they brought their own driver with them, and they asked me about getting somebody to drive the other car. And I thought about you. And Bill said, well, yeah, I'd like to drive it. And he said, well, they taken them out on Wilson Boulevard, and they gave them Jim Roper. That was their driver, the fastest car, and you could drive the other one. Now, my daddy never qualified that car, so he started toward the rear. And I don't know, it had 18, 19, 20 cars, something like that. And Bob Flock led the first 5 laps of that race. The next 145 was led by Bill Blair and the other Lincoln. He done call them and passed everybody. In the meantime, it was a hot day, and a lot of cars were running hot, coming in pits, pouring water around them, and going back out. And the track started out being dirt, and they had it well watered down, you know, with calcium chloride, and as they put on. Y'all got something going on between the 2 of you?
She was.
No, I was smiling because I sent Dad a text, and he's listening.
Okay.
It's
okay, folks.
Speaking of her, I got my wife sitting to my right.
I was
and
making
we've
his
got
coffee.
Young Bryson over here, and Rob McHale sent a text, said hi to y'all, to Sheila too. And he's playing the 23rd here at WAME.
That's great.
Yeah. So, well, let me ask you a question right quick.
Sure.
Before you get back to that, was that the speedway that was on Little Rock Road and Wilkinson Boulevard, the corner there in Charlotte? Okay. Because I grew up in that area. You know, I lived out beside off of Morris Chapel Road, and I worked on Little Rock Road, and then I moved out beside the airport right near Hamm and Moody for, I don't know, 1980 or something.
Right.
So I always passed by there, and I heard that there was a speedway there at some point. And there was like a Allison's Trucking
That's
or something.
Right. Exactly. It was 3/4 mile dirt, and it was, you know, it was for that period of time. It was a fairly decent track. All of them were dirt. Maybe seat anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000. I think Hillsborough would seat about 10. No, they wouldn't seat that much. Probably 5 or 6. The High Point Speedway I know was seat 10, but they were all similar. Except the High Point Speedway had a tunnel under it to get in and out of it, and this tunnel for the pedestrians to get out of the grandstand back into the infield for the fans. But get back to that Charlotte race. There's not a lot of people know what happened over there that day, and in fact, there's not a lot of people left living that witnessed that race, and there was very little written about it. The main deal that happened was that my daddy fell out. Then he made a pit stop, and according to the paper and others that were living at that point in time, he done lap the field at least twice with that Lincoln. The guy told him, and they said, "How do you want me to drive this car? It's brand new." The guy told him, said, "Drive the hell out of it." So that's what my daddy did. And I know there's an article in Benny Phillips wrote it with Jim Paschal, who had driven his daddy's car over there that day, and driven his daddy's car. It was a 47 Ford, I believe it was, coupe. Lee Petty was there with somebody else's Buick. He turned it upside down. And when it stopped, it landed upside down. I think the wheels were still turned on it. But anyway, he was there. They tore a few cars. But it was an pit stop that put the Lincoln that my daddy drove out of the race. He come in to get gas, and they had a gas can there, and they didn't have phones or nothing that period of time. They just took the lid off the tank and turned it upside down, you know.
Yeah.
And then the guy went around and put a quart of oil in it, and the hoods, half split hoods, you open one side up, you take the oil cap on, put a coat of oil in it. And some bystander wanted to help. So he reached over, he took his shirt off, T-shirt, and took the radiator cap off, and picked up a water bucket. And, of course, when he took that radiator cap up, the water rushed out of it, and then they poured cool water back in, and it broke the thermostat housing on it, and that put him out of the race. And you're talking about a fight. After that, my daddy got a hold of that guy, and my mother said he tried to kill him.
Oh, yeah.
You know? But anyway, that's sort of a deal what happened. And then when Hubert Westmoreland, he was originally from Kernersville. He moved to Burlington, and he was a moonshine guy himself. And he fixed a lot of moonshine cars. And Hubert was an easygoing guy and didn't say too much, very low-key, and real quiet voice. But he knew what he was doing. And he entered that car, which was a liquor car, meaning that it had a helper spring on the rear of it. See, in that period of time, they run the liquor cars, too. I got pictures of my daddy's liquor car, and they sat sort of like this with no load on them, then they sat down. And then the helper spring had two clamps on one on each end, and it would catch them, and that supported the load. But anyway, Hubert had that car entering the race. He happened to see Glenn Dunaway walk by, and Hubert just getting up out from under the car. And he asked Glenn, Glenn, you driving anything? Glenn said, no. I'm just over here to watch the race. Like many of the others, all they had was their modifieds that they drove. So Hubert said, how about driving this car? And Glenn said, okay. So when my daddy fell out with Glenn, he took over the lead of that race. And then he won it, and the other Lincoln finished second, and it was running hot at the end of that race. So he wasn't running about 40, 50 miles an hour when he finished the race. That was with Jim Roper. And they're all from Great Bend, Kansas. Now, after the race is over, I sort of believe, now this is my opinion, that France really wanted one of them Lincolns to win. The guy that in the newspapers that did Dick Tracy, he's the one that made a mention about it in the newspaper, and that's how those two guys from Kansas found out about that race back here.
Okay.
I didn't know his name, but the driver of the Lincoln, they brought Roper here with them, and he got the fastest one. The other one, my daddy drove, and it was number 44, or 34, which way. But anyway, Roper, he was, I won't say a braggart, but he was proud of himself, thought a lot of himself. And a lot of the guys down here just didn't warm up to him. Yeah. And then one of the other guys that had the Lincoln there was Millard Clothier and Ben McIntyre. I think McIntyre owned the dealership, and Clothier was the money man. And I mean, they let everybody know that they were well off.
Plus, he was I guess you could say a Yankee. I mean,
yeah, they was Great Bend, Kansas.
Yeah,
and they didn't. People didn't warm up to them, so it didn't last but just a few races here. They run Daytona Beach. My daddy drove the Lincoln again there and led it, and run out of gas, and they poured gas in it. See that track down there, David? You couldn't run the whole 160 mile without running out of gas. You had to stop there at the end of the race and get gas. So they were getting smarter as they went, short shift and stuff like that. And I'll tell you about that later. But getting back to the race over here, the most interesting thing about that race, they disqualified Hubert's car because of the helper springs. Somebody noticed them. Now, they were inspected, pre-race inspection, and nobody said a thing about it. Post-race is when the complaint started about that.
Yeah.
So France disqualified him, said it's supposed to be strictly stock. So Hubert got a lawyer and took him to court, and it's tried in Greensboro. And they presented their case, in Greensboro, North Carolina, and the judge made the decision that, you can read here, it says strictly stock in the entry blank. And see, the rules back then were generally on the entry blank, maybe a paragraph. They didn't have rule books.
Okay.
Eventually they did, and they add to them a little bit. But France made his rules as he went many times. And I think on the last page of that rule book, it said that they reserved to change, to be the last word. In other words, he could change the rule anytime he wanted to, and he did so.
Yeah. So they got taken to court. I guess those people never raced again in NASCAR.
No. What they did, the judge ruled in France's favor.
Okay.
And the drivers had, at that Sunday, June the 19th, that they made up a pot and gave the money winnings to Glenn Dunaway. They felt strongly about that he drove all day and didn't win the race and got disqualified, so they passed a hat and gave him some money. And then went to court, and France won. Now, the end of that deal was, when they give it to Jim Roper, I don't know if maybe he run one more race. I don't remember him lasting maybe 1 or 2 races, and that was it. And same thing about the 2 guys that brought the Lincolns here. But later on, if you remember, I don't guess you would remember this, but they had the race at Darlington 1950s, the first super speedway track built down here.
Yeah, it was about 21 years before.
Of course, yeah, you wouldn't remember. But the guy that won that race was Johnny Mance. And guess whose car it was? Here at Westmoreland. And the car belonged to, guess who? Bill France, Alvin Hawkins. And I always felt like, my dad did too, that to make up to Hubert for what happened, that France got him to prepare that Plymouth.
Yeah.
That's the way I feel about it. Now, there's a story behind that too. Cotton Owens had a Plymouth. Now, Plymouth offered an export-import kit, meaning that the export kit had a bigger carburetor off a truck and exhaust and intake, mounted those 6 cylinders all one piece. You know, they could come apart to all one piece with the carburetor on it. You could take it off as assembly and put it back on as assembly. And I don't know if it had a different cam in it or not, but it had a different intake and carburetor.
What year would that have been?
1950.
Okay.
6-cylinder Plymouth. This plain Jane, probably $1,500 car, 15, 18 or something like that. And by the way, the 39 Fords was only about $700 new.
Yeah.
So
you saw some in the picture when you come in, right?
There's one up there in that picture,
Like,
sure.
wish we still had that.
Yeah.
Here parked in Statesville.
The deal was that Darlington, Harold Brazenton, Harold been in Indianapolis, and he come back south to his home down there wanting to build him a track, which, you know, I won't go into that, but they ended up building an egg-shaped track, you know. And so he was getting it sanctioned by a Midwestern organization, and he made a trip up to High Point, and he came by my daddy's service station to put up a poster about it and talk to my daddy about coming down and run. My daddy, as others had told Harold, said, you need to talk to Bill France. You're not going to have enough cars if you don't, because we're not going to come run for you. See, France did not want them running for somebody else, because he had. If you run his circuit, you got points for every race, and to do that, that was his deal with the point system. Gets you to attend all the races. Then he could tell the promoter that all the cars will be there, and named drivers have a full field of cars. They pay a bigger purse. Everybody would benefit. Well, when it came to Darlington, Harold was not going to sanction with Bill France to start with. And then the guys kept telling him, you need to talk to Bill France. So he got France involved, and that's how France got involved with Darlington. And there was some publicity shots made of him looking at the blueprints for Darlington and so forth. And my daddy was there, and I was there when they done that. They made a picture of my daddy standing next to his son-in-law's Mercury, new Mercury. And they used that in some of the magazines and stuff. And I got pictures of it today. But that Plymouth that Hubert had that showed up, it did not have that export-import kit on it. Now, when I say export-import, I'm not sure the proper name for it, but I called it that all these years, and that's the way I heard it, but it was like an import kit. Well,
just easier to bolt on stuff when it gets over there, basically.
Yeah, and it made more power.
Okay.
See, the carburetor's bigger jets, and bigger free-flowing intake and exhaust manifold.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, Cotton Owens had one, and they wouldn't let him run it. So he had to take it off and put the stock one back on there, you know. Well, that time you go down the street there, and they inspect them at an old shed about 2 or 3 miles from the track, and they escort you back to the track with one of the officials, so you didn't tamper with it. They put a seal on it, and then clamped it together. There's a lead seal, and they then printed on it. It had the wire run through it.
Yeah.
Well, Hubert, so he took his back to Burlington. You could take your car home. You could drive it home if you want to. That's what a lot of them did. As long as you didn't mess with that seal. And the seal was around the cylinder head bolt, carburetor, and all. They had drilled holes in them so that you couldn't take it loose.
It's funny how you say that, because we started doing that again with the Cub engines a few years ago when we had to have a sealed engines and that type of thing. They started drilling the ends of the studs, and then you had the seal,
Right.
which I know we've always done that for years with the lead, but then they had these new white ones that you push it in, but you can't pull it back out. And
That's
I know that
right.
we've already done that, but now they're doing it with the cylinder heads and all that. But they did it back in 1950 too.
Well, they
also.
need to dig old Hubert up and get
about that?
him to tell him how he would beat that seal. He could do it.
Yeah,
Well, he went home and put his export-import manifolds on it and carburetor on it.
yeah.
And won the race. And they wouldn't let Cotton do it. Cotton didn't know about what Hubert done. Well, anyway, he won the race, inspected, enough said about it. My daddy drove that same Plymouth. His first NASCAR, what we call Cup today, under the lights, was at Columbia, South Carolina. And my daddy finished second in it, and Frank Money and Perry Smith's Studebaker won it. Come time to inspect the cars, Hubert was pulling that car with a 49 torpedo back Oldsmobile, green one, dark green. And his wife Lottie was there with him, and my mother and myself, and that's all was with him. I went down with Dad. Well, when the race is over, Hubert raised the trunk. There's a green Army blanket laying there. He got that intake and carburetor and manifold as assembly off that car and walked around and laid it in that trunk, and took this side of the Army blanket, flipped it over it, and under it was the original stock one. He took it and set out on the ground. After a while, the inspector come to it and looked at it. That's right. That's okay. You know, they made something like a valve to go down through the ventures of the carburetor,
Sure.
and he can make all that stuff.
Yeah, go, no go.
And so that car was illegal as John Dillinger, but it belonged to Bill France and Alvin Hawkins.
Yeah.
But that was a little bit of what they did, and they could get by those seals, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
They could do that.
That's wild. I mean, I'm sure there's ways to do it. They probably just melt their own lead, you think?
I'm not sure what they done.
Probably had a number imprinted on it, though, like NASCAR number.
Well, they might have
Who knows?
used the wax to put on it and make another mold where they
Yeah,
could
that's true.
reclamp
Yeah.
it, is what I would have probably done.
Yeah. Yeah. See, there's a way around it.
Yeah, there's all kinds of ways to do it.
Hey, let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back. We got Bill Blair in with us, so he's going to talk some more about NASCAR history. And if you have any questions, you can put your questions on. Tracy will be monitoring those, and Bryson as well on the YouTubes and
With a
on
big Q.
Yes. So we'll be right back to Racing Roots with Hamm.
Looking to buy a new home or sell your existing one? Do you want to know?
At 6:30.
550 and 92.9 WAME.
And we're back to Racing Roots with Hamm right here, 550 AM, 92.9 FM, and on DHammiam on YouTube. If you want to see us live here in the Randy Marion studio, you can also go to Racing Roots with Hamm on Facebook and see our Facebook Live. So we're getting some props set up now. We got Bill Blair in the studio with us, and it's great to see him again. Last time I saw him was down at the Ponce Inlet. We had the historic North Turn Legends Parade.
Right.
And it was the beach road course. It wasn't exactly the original because I guess the road's been moved over, a part of the road.
Well, the beach is all original except new sand. But the old road, there's a section of it left.
Yeah.
But the rest has to be, just put a few curves in it.
Yeah.
The original deal was the old highway about this wide. With one, as they passed one another, you could probably reach out and touch the car. That's how close they were. And, of course, they had some wrecks back on that backstretch. The guy got killed time or two.
Oh.
But, yeah, this short section of it's left there. But basically it's still a historic spot for us to go down there and relive those days and honor those guys.
My buddy Scott had just tuned in, a beer man down there, him and Jana. And that's who we stay with when we go to Daytona. And he walked out on the beach and he's like, "Isn't this something how this is the same sand they raced on back then?" He was joking, of course, because I was thinking, wait a minute. Oh, no. Anyway, yeah that's cool, though. Historic location. We actually went up to Ormond Beach. I guess it's been about 3 years ago when I kind of
first we went down,
Yeah, the first time we did a live show elsewhere besides my shop or the house or whatever, and or Beer Man's Cave, Beer Cave. I call it Beer Cave. Anyway, we did it from Ormond Beach as the sun was going down, and we were there at that little garage, the
old Flagler garage.
Yeah, we started out at a park.
Yeah, well, that's the...
Yeah. Well, that was the largest wood structure. I don't know if it's in the world, but in the country, it was solid wooden structure was the old hotel, Flagler Hotel.
Oh. And
so they started there in early 1900s. I think Olds brought his car down in 1903 and set a record of a whopping 53 mile an hour, something like 52 or 3 mile an hour.
Yeah.
What they would do, they would, the manufacturing started in Annapolis and that part of the world or the country, and then later on they moved to Detroit because of the waterways. They'd come a canal across New York to there, The manufacturer moved up there to Detroit.
Oh, okay, got you.
Yeah, and there's a name for that canal. I don't know what it is, but that's how it moved. But Indianapolis, see, it was built as a proving ground. And they go out there and spend a month, and whoever survived was declared the best vehicle. And a lot of them involved in it was Allison transmissions, and then you had the Fisher for the bodies, and Ford, different manufacturers, Chevrolet and different ones. And so then people, it drew big crowds, and they said, well, why not charge for this? And so they started charging and built grandstands. Next thing you know, they had 1909, the first race there.
Hmm.
And
it was a straight?
Oh, no, it was 2.5 mile track, man.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And it started out being dirt, and then...
yeah. I mean, originally, did it just start out just doing straight lines?
No.
And motorcycles and all that?
Well, they had air shows there and had other stuff going on, but as I know it was 2.5 mile road course, and they laid it out on the ground how they're going to do it. To start with, it was sort of progressive banking, but they called it then saucer shaped. The High Point Speedway was built like that. It was a miniature of the Indianapolis Speedway. They called it saucer shaped back then, but now we call it progressive banking. But it started out being a proving ground, ended up being the Indianapolis 500, and that's when I was telling you later on that Quinsonbury and Don O'Reilly of Speed Age wanted them to run a 500-mile automobile race there in like 47, 48, and I think that's where France got a little bit of his idea from. But anyway, getting back to the Strictly Stock, if you will, there just a minute.
Yeah, my mind drifted back to Ormond Beach whenever you were talking about that.
Mine drifts too when you don't ask me questions. But Ormond Beach, they used to spend their winters there, the manufacturers did. And they would send the car down by rail. That's where the railroad stopped, I believe, was right there at that time. And that big hotel. And the mechanics would come and work on the cars. keep them running, and they'd challenge one another up down that beach. They'd set up a barrel or something to race to and race around it and race back. And that's how that deal got started. And later on, as you know, every year it kept getting faster and faster, more vehicles. Then they had the speed runs, and people building special vehicles for to set land records, you know. And that was probably recognized as a place to be, that Long Beach. And it seemed to me like it used to be wider than it is now. It might be my imagination, but it seemed like it was. But when the Northerns come in and left, they left the beach packed. Then they'd ring the big fire bells at all the firehouses, and they'd let schools out, and people just crowd up and down, get on them sand dunes to watch the speed runs. And I'm speaking later in the well, it was in the 30s basically.
Probably global warming has caused the beach to get
but
icebergs are melting.
There's some got hurt there very bad. One drowned, and one spectator got killed one time. A photographer got killed. You didn't know which way they was going, and they'd shred the tires. The tires was made of silk. They brought the tires with them. Big old tall tires, you know. I'm gonna call them tars. That's what us racers call a tire. Is a tar.
Yeah, tars. That's it. Yes.
but
it was amazing how close the spectators were.
Yeah, and see that Ormond Beach where it started, and as people built their homes on the beach, then they started moving on down towards Proncillon down there. And I think that beach, as I remember, I've been to two different ones, and I think they built 4 until the last one was built because of intrusion. And when we used to run there at Daytona at the last in the 50s, there was houses there on the beach at that time. And Bill France had to do something, find a place somewhere else to run or move it. And I tell you, I don't know how to go about doing this, but I remember people talking about it. He came up to North Carolina, to Greensboro, and presented a program to Guilford County, a proposal, I'll put it like that. If they'd build a sporting complex up in Guilford County about the airport, that would be a centrally located place here, called it I think that's where some of them got the Tri-City from.
Okay.
And it'd be about the middle of North Carolina, in the proximity of Charlotte, Raleigh, Richmond, Atlanta, so forth, and build a complex. And he wanted a racetrack, and he was to run the races, but if they'd do all the other, he wanted the privilege of running the races there. He wanted a deal with them, you know. And but they turned him down, and they ended up building it down in Daytona. But that's got to be on the record somewhere that he did that, because I've heard it too many times over the years that he did that. But on that first year of him having an experiment at Charlotte, his next race he had was at Daytona Beach. It had about 4,000 people. Now over at Charlotte, they call it New Charlotte Speedway, but it's anything but new. Dirt, you know, rough as a cob. They had, depending on where you got your information from, but in the newspaper it said something like 12,000 people or so. That was probably a tax deal there. But it's really close to what I understand, about 18,000, 19,000 people. I know that he told T. Taylor Warren. T. Taylor was a guy from up around Delaware, up north somewhere, and he brought his wife Jenny down to Greensboro, North Carolina, to Greensboro High Point Road, and he went to work for Alderman Studios. A friend of my daddy's there in High Point. It was a furniture studio is what it was. They made pictures for the furniture manufacturers, put in the magazines. And Taylor met my daddy through them and started going to races with my daddy. And my daddy introduced him to Bill France. And Jack Cancer was the original first NASCAR photographer. And Taylor wanted a job with France because he loved stock car racing. He had ventured up to, when he was lived up north, he had went to different races up there, you know, just loved it to death. And France told him, said, well, I've already got a photographer, but if you're willing, said, there's some races that he can't go to, maybe we can use you. And Taylor agreed to it. Now, see, Taylor had a full-time job working at the studio, and he hung out down at the service station with my dad in his race cars. So, I say he got started, and that was at North Wilkesboro. So when this come along in 1949, Taylor was already working his way into being a full-time photographer, and I'll tell you how he done that. But France over at Charlotte He was worried to death not going to have a crowd. Didn't know how this deal was going to work, Strictly Stock racing, how it's going to work. And they called it Strictly Stock. That's what everybody else called it too. Russ Catlin, Quincybury, and different ones. And when they patrol come up over there and told him, said, you're going to have to close the gates and start this race because it's blocking the highways. People can't get to and from. So they had to do that, and they kept delaying it, and they finally had to shut the gates. And I think they had about 19,000 people is what most people think they had, but they didn't report that many. But it was a crowd. It was full.
First time I saw a picture of it was Dargan posted one, I think this morning or yesterday, a picture of that, the grandstands too.
Yep. Well, he told Taylor, France told Taylor once, said, Taylor, make me a picture of all them people coming across the track. So when you come in that track, you come across the back straightaway.
Okay.
Unless you went around and going to sit in the grandstand, then you went on around and parked over in the field. But to get in the infield, you had to come across the track into the infield. And they just swarms of them coming. And said, make me a picture of that. He said, I want that picture to be, I'm going to use it and put it at my headboard, over my headboard. That's going to be the first thing I see when I get up in the morning and the last thing I see when I go to bed at night. So Taylor made in that picture, and I always wondered what happened to that picture. It's somewhere, no doubt. I bet they still got it. But, excuse me, that was their first race, second race at Daytona. They had reported 4,000 people there. But remember, he finally had to put signs up down there, rattlesnakes. Because, see, people's coming by boats into the Inland Harbor there and coming across and getting them sand dunes and come across into the track. And nobody could stop it, no crowd control.
Yeah.
Because when I went down there, I stood along the edge of that highway, the back stretch. But Dad told me, he said, you stay right over here. Don't you go anywhere else. So I went with everybody else after they left from a standstill going up the beach, to watch them come down the backstretch. And I stand right on the edge, and they come over and so fast I didn't have time to stand back. It blowed me off my feet, and I landed on my butt in the sand, at the sand dunes. And so I didn't do that again. But anyway, that was the second race. Third race, Occoneechee. And he put everything he could into it to advertise for that race. That was going to be the make or break race. And he ended up having a good crowd of 19,000 people. Madrid drove that Lincoln again down there, and I don't know where it finished, but I believe that, if I ain't mistaken, it seemed to me like it ran off the track with that thing. But anyway, he told my daddy, he said, sell that modified. This is the future. This is the future of what we're going to do. They run 8 races, and I think they had 90-some thousand people all total that they reported. And that'd been over 12,000 per race. And now we got, it changed to Grand National. Now we got Cup racing. That's where she started right there. And I brought a couple of things here to show you how it used to be here in a minute if you want to look at them.
Yeah, definitely want to see those.
Sure.
We're going to get to some of the questions and comments and that type of things, give some shout outs to some of our friends. I was trying to remember, and it's kind of what I started looking up, because it's been a few years since he passed away. I don't know, gosh, probably 10 years ago. What was his name? The president of NASCAR back in the 80s.
Back in the 80s?
Was it Dick? Yeah. And I forgot his name, but he lived right down the street from where that old Charlotte Speedway was. Right, because I just remember that, because my bus used to pass by there all the time. You remember seeing all the Winston Cup vehicles parked in his yard?
Humpy? No.
No. It was, yeah. Somebody answer that question. And I feel dumb whenever you get it, because I really kind of know the answer.
I know CEO was one time, Big Bill, Billy, and then Brian.
Yeah.
But you're talking about somebody else.
Yeah, he was the before Mike Helton, basically, that position.
I really don't know.
Yeah, but but I always wondered who lived there when I was a kid. I was always a race fan, and then I finally figured out that's who it was. I was like, wow, that's right. And my school bus passes by there every day. Down in Charlotte, that was Race City, it seemed, back in the day.
Yep.
You
talking about
most of the race teams.
Your uncle and all?
My dad.
Your dad?
Her dad and grandfather working at home.
Well, before that, it was Schumann Dunaway and then Schumann Thompson, but their place right on Main Street over there in Charlotte, South Main Street.
Whereabouts on Main Street?
South Main.
Because I know you said it used to just run right through town.
It's grown so much now, but there was no bypass. You had to go right through town. We'd stop over there going to a race and visit with them.
Jackie says Dick Beatty.
Dick Beatty.
Dick Beatty.
That's
okay,
it.
Dick
Thank
Beatty
you.
was the inspector.
Thank you, Jackie.
Inspector.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, then so you had to start out with Ed Samples, your first inspector. He was a racer. Mm-hmm. And then he didn't last long. And then Norris Friel was probably the most famous one of all of them that I can remember. And he was a fair guy. And then you had Bill Gasaway and his brother Joe. But Dick Beatty, he was a racer. He started out being a racer. I think he might have run some motorcycles, but his drive, I know he was at Darlington 55 at a Ford. And then later on, he was inspector for the Grand American Circuit. He'd walk around with his little rule book in his back pocket. He'd pull it out, and after he'd walk up to the car and look at it, then put it back up, go look at the car, just checking things. And he caught us one time with, wasn't supposed to do what we did on the exhaust system. We did. We had another air system we wasn't supposed to have to feed the carburetor. And he told us before we come next race, be sure and have it off there.
Yeah.
And fix it. That was with the Javelins, with the American Motors cars.
Okay, yeah. That was
Toddville
nice.
Road.
Toddville Road. That's it. Gosh, it's starting to escape me. I started thinking about my brother. My brother's name's Todd, and I was like, Todd Road. This Toddville Road there.
Toddville.
Yeah, and I remember seeing him years later. I saw him last time. I remember seeing him last time. It was at Darlington, and it was at the inspect. Seems like he used to be there in the trailer when you would come and check in, when you come to sign in and stuff.
One thing about Dick Beatty, especially at Daytona, Dick didn't, he's just an average guy, and he was fair, as far as I know. He's always fair. But these Northerns would come down there sometime, and we'd call them Yankees. But they're nice people. I can tell you some more stories about that. But they come in like they owned the place down at Daytona,
Yeah.
And Dick walk up, start looking at the cars, and they'd give him a little bit of lip,
Yeah.
Oh, we done this, we done that, we ready to go. Are you now? So Dick would put them to go to work on that thing. He'd have him, Dick would make them work on that car all week, checking stuff, taking this apart so we could look at it. Let's drill a hole in this roll bar here. Let's see how he got it mounted. Just keep them, they never would get on the track. He'd do it on purpose, He'd give them a hard time.
Yes. Yeah. That's cool. And then once you have to check something, have to get back in the line again, that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then you might have to start in the rear. All right, so do we have any questions or comments, and then we'll go to the...
But there's a lot, so you may
There's
just want to do your
Okay.
commercial first.
Well, go ahead and say hey to some people right quick.
Okay, we'll say hey to the infamous DD, Dickie Dennis, Random Epics watching, Leland Johnson, Dargan Watts, and let's see who else is watching.
Will
The
Cronkite.
Alan Steele Show.
Oh, yeah, hey, Alan.
Will Conkrite's watching. And I think Scott and Janet Trevison's watching.
Yeah.
Craig Parrish. Let's see, who else is on here?
People from all over the world.
They are. They're everywhere.
And Will Cronkite was asking about what years was Ray Fox involved as a NASCAR motor inspector?
Oh, that I
That was
don't
before
know.
my time.
I'm just sitting here trying to think. Ray Fox, I know it's probably after the 70s because we helped pit him over in Charlotte in 70, and Tiny Lung drove his car, and Tiny arm was going to sleep. It run fire, but Ray was something else. I liked him, but he could make them run.
Yeah.
He could get them to run.
I saw a cool picture of you and Will. I guess it must have been at the thing in Mount Airy.
Yeah, I met him. I don't know exactly when I first met him, but we had something in common. Ronnie Thomas was coming along, with his dad to all the races, and Ronnie just a kid, and they started that Baby Grand Circuit. Got first started by Bill Ellis, and there was an ATU agent sort of took it away from Ellis, and then France took it away from the ATU agent and called it the Daytona-race series.
Okay.
That was Tony Chapman, the ATU agent. You don't generally get over on Bill Ellis, but he did. Well, Will built Ronnie Thomas a Vega. Beautiful, beautiful car. And I believe Will told me that was the first turnkey car that he ever built. And of course, I had built the motor for it. The boys that worked for me in there in the shop, we built it. And I think the first race was at Atlanta. And I think Will can correct you on this, but I believe it sat on the pole and led the race, and Byron come out of it. If you knew Ronnie and Jabe, they would just spend so much money. And they wouldn't have a lot of money to spend, but we needed a big oil pan on it. And the use stock oil pan, that wasn't enough. So it didn't last the full race. I believe that's what happened to that car. But we come back later, put the right oil pan back on, no more problems with it. And that's where Ronnie got started. And that's where Will got started with Ronnie.
Okay, yeah. Will's been around quite a while in the sport. Moved down and started his own business there in Fort Mill.
He sure did.
Yeah. In engineering. He come down as an engineer.
Very, very smart guy. I enjoy being around him. You always learn something.
Yeah. He's worked with some great ones. It was, let's see, the 1975, 75 he's with Donnie Ellison. 77 was with Ricky Rowe, Rookie of the Year, his crew chief at that point. Bryson, do we have any questions over there?
No, we don't. Turn me on first. There you go.
Gotcha.
We don't have any questions, but we do have several people tuned in. So quite a lot of listeners. So Becky Courtney is tuned in. Jim Dooley is tuned in as always. He says, such a historic storyteller. Love it. And Jeff Eubanks is tuned in. Barbara Overcash and William Hamby are all on Facebook. And then over here on the StreamYard, I've got Greg Gull is tuned in and Philip Riot is tuned in. He says Yankees for sure, back on that conversation we were just having a minute ago.
Yeah, always
laughing face. So.
Even with people being from out west, I just call them Yankees, whatever.
Well, France pretty smart dude. He used that, and my daddy did too. My daddy learned a lot from Bill France. He always said that France was a better promoter than he was a driver.
Yeah.
And my daddy met him, and I got to meet him also. But I was 3 years old. I didn't know what's going on, but was at High Point Speedway in 1940.
So you're not wanted by the law or anything, right? Because that's major. Just Bill Hamby's tuned in. Our old sheriff's office.
Not that I know of.
I got you. Yes.
But see, they built that track right across the street from our dairy farm.
Yes.
In France, Lloyd C., Red Vault, Roy Hall, Bill Snowden, Bonnie Flock, Uncle Joe Blair, just on and on. People come from all over the country to race there. And France was driving a Graham, #1, and he turned it over, just tore it all to pieces. And Lloyd won the race. And my daddy, I believe, finished third in that car. It was a 39 Ford with shoe polish on it, number 20. I believe it said number 2 on that particular. He's always been number 2, by the way.
Yeah.
But that's where we met Bill France and those guys. And as I grew up, I can remember that. The main thing I remember is the fact that it was such a big place, and the noise and the dust.
And because you were really young.
Yeah.
So, yes.
And my mother carried me over there. We just had to walk across the street, which would have been probably half mile total walk, But, I still, and that place stayed there for years. And when the war came, that's what shut it down. The war came. And those guys, the Beatty brothers, they were playboys from Jacksonville, North Carolina, and they'd been in Indianapolis, much like Harold Brazelton had. And they come back, wanted to build a track, and that was a big old apple orchard owned by the state of North Carolina. And so they bought it from the state and didn't tell nobody what they were doing. So the surveyors showed up and started surveying that place, and they come across the street about lunchtime and get milk from the dairy over there. They loved that chocolate milk, and you get milk at that time with cream on top of it. And they didn't tell them what they was doing. So my daddy went over there one day and saw what they were doing, the way they shaped it out. See, it was going to be a racetrack. He knew what a racetrack was. And so that would have been in probably 38 when they bought that property. It didn't take them long to build it back then. And so he was the first to get to go around that track. And they had a challenge race between him and Jimmy Llewellyn. Jimmy had a new Ford also. So they got over there, Pete English, one of the owners of the English Motor Company there in High Point, Ford dealer. Him and Jimmy were pretty good buddies, and so he got in the infield and held the handkerchiefs up, white handkerchief, and he dropped it. They were going to take off. One was on one straightaway, and the other was on the other straightaway. So whoever caught the other one first was considered the winner, but don't pass it. Don't throw rocks on the front of the car and all, So anyway, Pete dropped the flag and they took off. My daddy caught Jimmy in a few minutes and a few laps and went ahead and passed him anyway. And so that was the first official race up there at that track was between them two. But, that's how that deal started. Then the war shut it down, and the Blair boys, Beatty boys come to see them and said, how about buying this property in the racetrack? And after the war's over, we'll lease it back from you, and you'll make money on it. And if not, you'll have it to add to your farm, use as pasture. And it was 137 7 acres, I believe it was, something like that is what it was all total. It hold 10,000 people in the grandstand, humongous grandstand. I got some of the pillars out of it now, the big old 2x2 cement pillars that you put the post on.
Yeah.
And so I got that and some of the posts out of that track. Took about a day and a half to dig them up. You know, I got the original posts.
Yeah. What you gonna do with those?
I got in the shop there at the house.
That's cool to have.
Yeah.
Gosh.
But anyway, that the boys voted 4-3 not to buy it. That's how close that they come to buying that thing. But it was sold at auction on a rainy day for about $10,000. Dealers Hitchcock bought it and tore it down and sold the lumber to build a church with there in High Point, and ended up having the land. And Blair still used it because Dealers was a good friend of ours. And in fact, Blair's put him in business, in the land business to start with, and then later on Hitchcock Lumber Company. So after that deal, my daddy went to the war in Baltimore, Maryland, building battleships. And when he come home, he and his brother built their own racetrack right next to the old High Point Speedway. And it was a half-mile dirt track called Tri-City. And that's where I really got to know those guys. I was old enough then to know what's going on. Bill France come down to sanction with him, and the Flock boys come down. And by the way, Bob drove one of my daddy's cars at the High Point Speedway and just tore it all to hell. And so this is a good story here. It was 39 Ford. My daddy he had 2 or 3 at one time. And the reason being, they were different colors. Blue with black fenders, and solid black. And then later on, he had a dark brown with just different colors. And the reason you do that, if you make too many trips with the same car into Martinsville, they're going to know what you're doing. Oh. So he would run one this color this week, and then the next week another one, another color. And some of the moonshiners were known to repaint them. There's a guy, and you'll meet him in Mount Airy if you come up there this year, Revis Brim. He constantly painted a 1954, just sometime twice a week, sometime twice a month. Just keep the law, away from him. Yeah. Because you see the same one all the time, you know something's up. Mm-hmm. Well, Bob tore that car up bad. Bob Flock did. And so they beat it out with a ball peen hammer and took it to Langhorne, Pennsylvania. This would have been 1940, 41. And Lois C's up in Langhorne. Bill France is there. Raymond Parks is there, Roy Hall, all the big boys, there. Mm-hmm. When Daddy shows up with that old beat-up 39 Ford, and they laughed at him, the Yankees did. And so you might well left that thing at home. It looks like it needed to be in the junkyard, making remarks about, So there was a guy named Monk Payne there, and Monk was my daddy's best friend because he had more tools than the rest of them had. And so Monk said, well, you boys won't be laughing after the race. Yeah. Well, how much money you want to bet on that thing? Monk said, how much you got? So they got him up a bet. Well, Lloyd won the race, but right there behind Lois C was that old beat-up number 2 car, Bill Blair's. And them Yankees come up and paid him right there and just said, man, I would never believe this. Now, having said that, there was a group of those boys up there, the Johnny Garback racing team, Pepper Cunningham was one of them. Wally Campbell was another one. Wally actually drove, I believe, for Johnny Marks some, with it on what you call a house car. And then you had, Wally, Pepper, and there was another one, but I can't recall his name. But they come to High Point run for my daddy. And the way it put it in the paper was his dad blame Yankees come back down here. And we're going to beat them up this time, We're going to win. We're going to win this deal. Well, when we go up there and run, I say we, my daddy, Jim Paschal, Bill Sockwell, Lou Allen, different ones from here. The Babcock brothers would run that track up there. I say brothers, the Babcock family maybe. They lived up yonder around Washington, D.C., as I remember.
They do furniture or something.
Yeah, I know, up in Virginia. But anyway, they would promote in their paper that the Rebel Rough Riders are coming to town.
Okay.
So they would use the north-south deal.
Yes.
To put people in the grandstand.
All right.
And I'm going to tell you that Garback and Pepper Cunningham were good, fine people, and Wally Campbell.
It makes you wonder, too, saying that, if that was part of the deal where like you had the Darlington races, and they would always have like the Southern 500 and things. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know they're proud of the, the South, but the rebel flag and all this stuff you would see on a lot of the programs and all. I'm just saying to kind of have like a north-south battle in it too. A little bit of marketing stuff there.
Well, it was,
NASCAR needs
and
these
France
days.
was very good at it. But see, the people in the South at that time, it's sort of a different culture today. And we didn't see anything wrong with it. I mean, every day is what you saw.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you know, on the farm, we had, you know, 7 boys. That's how we could do it. And then they had color people working for them. And I grew up with them.
Yeah.
And never no problem.
Right.
They're just members of the family. So it didn't mean a thing to us. It's just everyday deal.
Yeah.
And nice people. I'm sorry it turned out the way it did, but
Well, when it becomes a political narrative, that's another
yeah,
story.
we didn't
but
need
yes.
that.
But that's it.
I don't think there was anything meant by it. In fact, I believe there was a colored league of racers that raced in the Georgias. I know that it wasn't. In Georgia and South Carolina, I'm pretty sure that they did, because I remember that, people talking about it. I never just seen one of them, but and Wendell Scott, I knew him, and Wendell was a fine guy. If you tore your car up after the race, he'd come to help you, put it back together, get it home, get it where you tore it.
Yeah.
And when I worked for Jim Paschal, see, my daddy retired about 1955, and he drove some for Paschal in '56. Paschal had a Mercury deal. That's how I met Bill Strop and all them guys, you know. And Billy Myers over there had a Mercury deal too. But I know that Paschal and I'd go up at least a couple times a year and take stuff up to Wendell's, like some cylinder heads, and give it to him. And we helped him. A lot of people helped him. They liked Wendell. And he was one of the guys. But you read other comments about it, and but I never saw that the way that it's written.
Yeah.
Never saw it.
Right.
We thought the world of him.
Yeah, that's what I figured. I could see that. You know, just like I said. Hey, let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back. We'll do the station ID and play a couple of spots, and we'll be right back. And if y'all have any questions, throw them on there right now. We got Bill Blair in with us, and I promise this time we are going to get to the things that we're going to show you that he brought us. We didn't have him bring them for nothing, so we'll be right back.
That's what you want to do.
No, I definitely want to see them. So
If you want to ask me a question, do it, man. I don't want to do all the talking.
I'm sure each of these things will spark up some more questions and things too. So we'll be right back to Racing Roots with Hamm.
50 and 92.9 WAME Statesville.
Hey, look at there's Ryan Scott at the Ford store, and these Jeeps are just out of sight.
Billy Buck, we have got them everywhere. 250 2020 Jeep Wranglers. They're at all the stores. The Ford store right here, Chevy store across town. We got them in Wilkesboro, Mooresville, Huntersville, Hickory. Anywhere there's a Randy Marion store, we have got Jeeps for sale as low as $31,888. They don't get any cheaper than that. The selection doesn't get any better than that. The pricing doesn't get any better than that. $31,888. Come see them at all the Randy Marion stores today.
With more than 20,000 students, Iredell Statesville schools rank among the 20 largest school districts in North Carolina. Our teachers represent a wealth of knowledge, with the average teacher in our district having 15 years of teaching experience. Iredell Statesville Schools' innovative approach blends a one-to-one technology initiative with collaborative best practices and a hands-on approach to learning. In addition to traditional school settings, the district provides a wide range of exciting educational opportunities through our choice programs, specifically designed for unique student needs. No matter your age, your background, or your personal goals, there's a place for you in the Iredell Statesville schools.
Buying or selling real estate in today's environment can be a very challenging and stressful thing. That's why when you're buying or selling your home, you need to turn to the #1 real estate team in the area, the Gallagher Home Team, powered by Keller Williams. The Gallagher Home Team is your trusted professional that works with you through all of the challenges of today's real estate market. When only the best will do, turn to Gallagher Home Team, strengthening our community one house at a time. Stop by and visit their new offices at 320 West Broad Street or give them a call at 704-657-5050.
All right, we're back to Racing Roots with Hamm, and we've got Bill Blair in with us this evening. And Bill Blair went to his first race, I guess it was 1940 when you were 3 years old, something like that?
Yeah, 1940, yeah.
Roughly.
3 years old, yeah.
Yeah. And that was over, was that Tri-County? Is that the one that ended up being?
No, High Point Speedway.
High Point
Tri-City Speedway.
Tri-City, okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. That's what I, for some reason, I get Tri-County in my mind.
Right.
Do you know where that's at? Okay, this way. A little bit further the other direction. All right. So Bryson, if you would move, let's see. Can you get both of these cameras? Can you get the picture in? Yeah, kind of split the difference.
I've got this one where I can.
Well, if you need to hold it right there for just a minute.
All right. So you're going to have to go towards Bill. Okay. All right. There you go. You got it on there? Yep. There you go. So
Perfect.
that is a picture of.
Okay, and I'm gonna tell you what it is. If you can't, can you see it good enough? Do you got any
Yeah, we
idea
can
what
see it
that's?
That's
what's
good.
happening?
Yeah.
Okay,
Perfect.
what you're looking at is a 1939 Ford called the Baby Diaper Car. The reason they called it the Baby Diaper Car is because what color do we paint it? Well, the guy owned the baby diaper service there in High Point painted his trucks pink and green. He said, well, I got some paint y'all can have. So he went and got it, brought it to us here.
Yeah.
So we painted it pink and green. And they painted it with a brush.
Pink and green. So
Well, now put it back up there, son.
Oh, okay.
Now, you're not done yet. Now, what the deal is there, that car, if you look, there's a chain tied to the tree that's tied to the rear axle housing of that car. Can you see it, what I'm talking about?
yeah, I'm gonna let's see. Yeah, you're fine. I'm zooming
Okay.
down on this one. So
Okay.
Okay.
Now, up on that, at the rear of that car, you notice there's a guy there with a big oil can like you oil the freight train, the hopper. It's on the freight train. It's a big old oil can. I still got that can.
Mm-hmm.
And on that is rims with no tires on them, and they're sitting down on wooden platforms. That's wood left over from the farm that my daddy built and set that car down on it. And in the trunk of that car, of course, is the cylinder heads and different stuff where they put in the trunk to add weight to it.
Okay.
The guy there with that oil can is Wes Hitchcock. Jay Hitchcock is his son, builds Hitchcock chassis. You might have heard of him there in High Point.
Yeah, I have.
And then the guy there behind the steering wheel is Bub Hitchcock. That's Wes's brother. And the guy there underneath the hood with a long hammer and a screwdriver, and a hammer, is Bill Blair. And that little guy there with his hands over his ears is me. And then there to my right is the little red wagon. That's my race car.
Oh, okay.
Now, that big old oak tree there stayed there until about 5 years ago. It was one of the biggest oaks in North Carolina. That building back there is the bull barn where they kept the bulls. And to our left of that bull barn is a 39 Ford liquor car. You might see a liquor case there at the back. And on the rear bumper there, you see a spotlight. That spotlight is for two reasons. One is to unload at night and load. The other is if you're being chased, when you get into a curve with ATU agent behind them, you turn that spotlight on to blind them. And he actually wrecked this guy named William Queen out of Greensboro, ATU agent, back in the 40s. And his son, Billy Queen, worked for me later on, and it's going to be, we hope, the future sheriff of Gifford County next election. But anyway, that's the purpose of that. Now, what they're doing there, son, don't go nowhere yet now.
He said his arm's getting tired.
Yeah.
What you have there is my daddy's modified number 2, Gifford Body Company, green and pink. And that car is being held wide open in gear. And the oil that he's putting on that wheel there, he runs back and forth, jumps that chain, is to keep them lubricated because it's going to go up in smoke and then fire if you don't do that. And there's grease on it also. That is a chassis dyno.
Okay.
What he's doing is holding it wide open, and he's moving the distributor back and forth till it reaches the maximum RPM. Those guys in those days tuned by ear. By ear. There was no such thing as a timer light that period of time. Now, when he got his timer set like he wanted, he cut it off. I'd run over to it and reach down on the intake manifold and scrape ice off with my fingers because it's burning methanol and nitro, 25% nitro. Well, they talked a few minutes, and they didn't have to have a fan on it because see, run the methanol and nitro, it actually run cool. You didn't need a fan. And that's why you can get in there and tune it like that with the distributor being right down the very front of that motor. Then next thing they do, they crank it up again, and he'd hold it wide open again and put it in high gear, and they'd be sitting there, that thing just a roaring. And I put my hands on my ears, and he'd be adjusting the carburetors. They had adjustable jets and a Grand Core intake with two carburetors. And now the way he'd do that thing, you didn't have the ETG gauges. He didn't know what they were. He didn't know what a dyno was, but he knew that if you loaded that motor just like you're going around a racetrack, that's the time to do it, time to tune it. Well, he looked down at those exhausts, and whatever color the exhaust was, that's what he tried to get them all alike. It'd be red hot about this far. If they go on past here, it's too rich, or it could be way too lean. And then he knew what he was doing. He'd get them all the same as close as he could, and it may take 30 minutes to do that. Well, then after that, they'd cut it off, and they'd talk about it, and then they'd, put the wheels back on it by that chain horse. I still got that chain horse you see hanging on the back of that tree there.
Yeah.
And that was what you call in 1946 and 47 a chassis dyno. And he didn't know to call it that, but he knew that's what he needed to do to tune that car. So that's what that picture tells us.
All right, so where did this picture come from?
Well, I've told people about what he did for years, and those that had seen him do that are all dead now.
Yeah.
Except me. And I'm the last voice, as you might say, but that's what Todd Morris says I am anyway, the last voice. But I described that to an artist up in West Jefferson. Was it Shoemaker Shoe? But anyway, he drew, he was an artist, he drew all the railroads on buildings and stuff. He was a railroad artist, and he published books for all those trains that he had painted.
Okay.
And so I told him about it one day. I said, could you do that? He said, sure. So I sketched it out sort of what it ought to look like. He had trouble drawing a 39 Ford. I had to draw the 39 car for him.
Oh, okay. I
failed the third grade in school because of that, drawing 39 Fords and putting them all in my school books and everything. And my mother had to pay for school books, and I still got them. Got Buck Baker's picture in there, my daddy's, and race cars all drawn in these books, and so I had to pay for them. My mother did.
Smile for the camera, Bryson. You can go down.
Yeah.
Smile.
Okay.
There you go.
So that's what the deal is there. And Stephen Shoemaker painted that for me, and we did some prints. I'm going to give you that print so you'll have something to.
That is awesome.
And I got a story with it.
Yes. That is great.
Now, another thing he did, are we still on time?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Can you zero in on this can here?
Yeah. On the can, hon.
On the can.
On the can.
Yeah, so just set that over there.
He's
You can
done
set it
with
over
the
there by my
picture for
jacket. Yeah, that'd be fine.
I think you'd get a job in NASCAR.
Right. Yeah. He's good. He's good. And he knows a lot about NASCAR and history and stuff too. So, Bryson.
Okay.
All right. So Bryson's adjusting the other camera.
There you go.
If y'all want to see what we're doing here, if you're listening on the radio, we got Bill Blair in the Randy Marion studio, and we're on DHammiam on YouTube. We're also on Facebook, but if you want the better camera angles, just go to my YouTube channel, DHammiam, and we're showing some of the things that Bill Blair brought in.
Okay, if you would, son, put your finger on this can. You all know what that is. That's an old Army fuel can. That's what that is, 5 gallon. And this next to it, Tracy said that was a jack. I can't believe that.
I don't know what it is.
You're not the only one who didn't know what it was. This is early plumber's blowtorch.
A blowtorch.
Yeah. What you do is you put kerosene in it.
Yeah.
And then you come right here. This is a pump. You pump it up, put it under pressure. Still works. It freezes tonight. I can fix my plumbing, right? And then you open this valve here, and it shoots a spray of kerosene out. And you go, shh, and you light it. And then you got a blue flame.
Ah.
Okay, now here's the deal. In 1947, my daddy had met a guy named Granny Anatelli. The Antelio brothers out of Chicago, Illinois. They got too much caster camera in this little chair here. Well, my daddy bought an engine, Grand Car engine from him, $750. Then he bought the second one. And on a 39 Ford, they had sideboards on them. And he put the sideboards back on so people couldn't tell what kind of motors in that thing. And he won a lot of races, and they become good friends. Andy called my daddy one day, and he said, Bill. In fact, I answered the phone. He wanted to speak to my daddy. And so I went and got him. He was outside working on that modified under the old oak tree. And we had a telephone that runs down through there, and I'd holler at him, hey, Bill. Bill. And I'd call him Bill because everybody that come see him called him Bill. I didn't call him Daddy. Mm-hmm. There'd be 10, 12, 15 people over there at different times all together, just come and see what they're doing. Of course, he was the center of attraction with that modified Ford, and a lot going on. And you might want liquor or something. Might want to get you a pint of liquor. So he'd sell it to you. That's how he paid for all this stuff. Well, Andy called him up one day and said, I got what you need, Bill. I think he called him Blair. Blair, I got what you need. They said, what's that? He said, I got an engine here out of my Indianapolis car. And he said, I practiced it. I got 2 laps on it and crashed it in the wall and tore the car all to pieces. And I think he said it made a lap to it 127 miles an hour with that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I want $1,500 for it. Daddy asked him what he want for it. And so my daddy counted up $1,500, put it in a paper bag, and took a 41 Ford with Charlie Ward and drove in to Chicago and brought that motor back. The Grand Corps boys, started out, I guess their daddy was a clockmaker from Italy. And he had 3 sons, Vince, Andy, and Joe. And they made a living to start with as kids, cranking people's cars in cold weather. And they also helped Honest Charlie get started out in Chattanooga with his speed shop. Mm. They were instrumental in that. And of course, they were called the Granatelli Brothers, and they changed it to Grand Corps, meaning Grand Corporation, Grand Corps. And that stuff is priceless stuff. You can find the stuff that they made. But my daddy had 3 other engines. And the Indianapolis engine was a Indianapolis, run 2 laps at Indianapolis and crashed it. And Andy was injured, and at that time when he did that, he was just a medium-sized guy, about like you, but it messed up his thyroid, and he became a big guy.
Yeah.
Well, he had a dry sump on it. My dad never heard of a dry sump. So he said, now what you got to do, he said, you get your Army can, that's what that is, put it behind the seat. And that Ford, if you know flathead Ford, there's a gear back there in the back that runs off the back of the camshaft. It turns the pump, oil pump.
Like on old tractors.
And then it's almost enclosed, but you can close it up and by tapping it and putting plugs in it. And what he had done, the pump that was in the pan, he left it there and run a line to this. And that field kept this full of oil. As it drained down, that would be your dry sump. And then that planetary system back there, if you closed it up, you could take and it would pull oil into it and pump it in that gallery up there. That tube runs down through there, which fed all your bearings, and it become a dry sump system.
Yeah.
And that's what he had on. He said, what you got to do is heat that oil before you crank it, because if you don't, it'll knock the bearings out of it. And so what my daddy had done, he got him one of these right here, and he'd get in the back of that car, at the racetrack, he'd heat this oil up like this. First time he ever done that, they said, what in the hell is he doing? And they thought this was fuel. And so they took off and running. They get back 50, 100 foot, waiting for that damn Ford to blow up. Look at this crazy SUV, he's fixing to kill himself. And so after a while, my daddy, he'd feel this, see, it's hot enough yet. You ain't fixing to run off, are you?
No.
Okay, he thinks it'll blow up. So he'd cut it off, and set it down, get out of it, and crank it up, and away it'd go. They had never seen a dry sump system. So that would be your first dry sump system in this part of the country, and that's 1947. Pretty interesting. And another thing he did, finally did knock the bearings out of it. One time he didn't heat the oil up. He screwed the spark plugs out and spin the motor off to prime the motor, because it's critical. See, they run 50 weight castor oil. That was very heavy, and if the viscosity of that oil probably got hot with something like 30, 40 maybe. But when you do that cold, it didn't want to move. So that's why this was used. That was your heater back then to warm up your oil.
It's probably had a good bit of bearing clearance, I'd say.
Well, they didn't know.
Yeah.
See, those full floating bearings, you put them on block wood, hit them in the middle, or bend them together, set the clearance, and you did it by the way they turned in there. So it was full floating, but didn't need no drag on it. You had something you had to get used to. You needed a right hammer and a right piece of wood. That's the way you done it. There's a scale that I showed you. I'll get it in a little bit. That way they set clearance on the walls of the piston. But another thing, can you get that for me, please? I'll show what they done. And
the old fish scale.
Yeah,
kinda.
This is pretty interesting.
I remember a friend of mine. He grew up down in South Carolina, and he taught me a lot at a dealership. He was an older guy. He talked about stopping the car and using a piece of bacon or fat back or something and replacing the bearing.
Yeah. Well, see this scale.
Yeah.
This was a fish scale.
I was going to say, that looks like something you'd hang a fish on.
Yeah.
That's right. Well,
or a shark.
What you did in those days, got you a hot bucket of water. If it's a metal bucket, you could take your blowtorch, this, and heat it up. And you do it out in the sun, keep your block hot. And you hone a little bit and stick that piston down there and pull it back through there with this, And I can't tell you what he was looking for, but they'd read that scale right there to get the right amount of drag on it. That's what they did. And the pistons at that time were 4-ring pistons. And finally, they started taking one of the rings off, and this was a 3-ring piston. And son, there's a piston in that box over there. If you bring it here, I'll show them something. You'll help. But you know, that's pretty primitive. But they didn't know all this. But these guys, something every day was new to them,
Right.
and the industry in itself. Now, my daddy knew that the people that knew something was those guys that hung around Indianapolis, and he met a guy named Bill Sockel that moved from Washington, D.C. down to Greensboro, and he'd been to Indianapolis, and he did a lot of stuff. And that's where Red Balk got his head start on the others around here, too.
Oh, yeah, I've seen plenty of pistons.
Now, this, of course, is what the flathead Ford piston looks like. And, of course, this has been coated. And you hook it, turn it upside down, hook this to it in here, and pull it up and down out of that cylinder and read it to what it's telling you, how much drag it's got on it. That's what you do. You pull this thing back and forth in that hole. And believe me, they would have drag, but when it was, see, this is where they drag. You can see on the camera here.
Yeah.
David's got a new trick.
And the pistons back then were round. They were not no cam ground in the skirts.
Yeah.
And, of course, if they were cold, then, of course, they would go through the cylinder very easily. And they were using, the only ring you could get at that time was a chrome ring. Of course, it wore out the cylinders. And all the dirt come through the carburetors of block engine didn't last you all that long, because I was already dirt, and it could just eat them up. But the chrome ring's the only thing that would last. You put a cast ring on it, it would last no time. And this piston here's got the little 1.5 millimeter rings on it and so forth. But I'm not going to skin up your table here. Here you go, son.
Yeah, 'cause there's a lot of tricks. I mean, a lot of things like that when I got into engine building.
There's a cutter over there, too, Sheila.
I look back now, and I see
the cutter, Sheila.
How a lot of the things that we did, they were doing that 50 years before, and probably on before that.
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff kind of comes back around. We always had, I would keep a fish scale in my toolbox. But we got, you get to the point where
I did not know that.
Yeah, when you're in a production engine kind of deal, once you figure out what works and what's got less drag, then you really don't check every time.
So what's the point of the fish scale?
But when you're learning it, you do. It's like a less drag, because if you can get that piston and rings to move up and down the cylinder with less drag, that's more horsepower potential for the engine.
So what's the ideal weight you're pulling?
Well, here's the deal. If you had too much, no drag at all, that means pistons, with it hot, that means pistons way too loose. You'll get a lot of engine blow by that way. So if you had, let's say, 2 pounds of drag, that could represent, when it's cold, probably 6 thousandths clearance. They knew that. And then simple tools like this. David, that's how you cut the dome in a cylinder head, if you want a little more clearance.
Oh, okay, yeah. A fly cutter?
And that's a file, made out of a file.
Out of a file.
You go to drill press or a little end mill, could do that with it.
Yeah.
But it's just simple stuff back then. And they also knew you're a race engine builder. Airflow through the engine is what it's all about, the volumetric pressure and the flow through the engine is air pump. And these guys knew that. And the camshafts at that period of time, all of them wanted a square nose on it, keep the valve still for so many degrees of rotation. They figured that going up down there, it disrupted the flow. Whether it did or not, I can't prove that. But anyway, that's what they thought. But what my daddy used is what a lot of them did back then. He hooked up the water hose to it to see what the deal was as it come out the port. Now, on the flathead Ford, son, can you bring the cylinder head over here, man? Do we have to pay him extra for this?
Cylinder heads. It's a little bit heavy too, by the way, just so you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, the big piece. It's aluminum, but it's not too bad. Right.
It's got some little weight to it.
Yeah.
Well, if he brought it over here, will it show what we need to show?
Yeah, we can get this camera on here.
Okay, just take this
show
right
it.
here, move it out of the way right here.
All right. So you want
Here, Bill, put that over here. We'll put it on this side.
Yeah, give her the torch. All right. So
I got the torch.
So we got this flat head.
And the Statue of Liberty.
Are we ready now?
Yeah, there you go.
I believe so. Can
All right,
So
David,
you
you
go
better
drill
be on your
press.
best behavior.
You got to torch me. All right, so we got the hit. So if you're on.
Go to the base grinder and make one of these.
All right.
Go to the base grinder and make one of these. And then come down on it from the press and cut this dome here. make a lick or two on it, and then measure it again. And if you got your reading to start with, you want it 10 more thousandths, just read as you with your indicator. But that's how simple that is. And today they put in a CN machine and push a button and it's done. But this is why they had to do it. And then if you look here in the middle of this head, I don't know if you can see this or not, but I've made some reference points. There's a lip in it, and that turns the air fuel down to the middle of the cylinder. That's what that does. That's what's in there. Of course, we redesigned some of this stuff, and the ideal situation is get a blank piece of aluminum like your own head. We've done that too.
Yep.
But as you know today, and what they did back then, it's same deal, but yet you got different ways of doing it. And the porting and polishing of an engine was really a science back in those days, and you get some stone grinders, and they didn't have carbide bits back in those days to do that with. They had a reamer, which is up there. I showed that too earlier.
Yeah. And so we had all the fancy fly cutters and the carbide burrs and everything else, like you mentioned. But there was one over there you showed that was you had to cut seats, valve seats. Yeah. Right. And it looked like it was reversible.
So
I guess maybe for intake and exhaust.
It's got the cutters around it.
And there's a glove over there too, the old glove. So.
Larry Lackey says he used some of those blow torches a long time.
Okay, there's the glove.
Yeah.
Oh, Larry did?
Larry Lackey says he used these blow torches a lot.
Do you know Larry Lackey?
I know he is, yeah.
Yeah, Larry's a very good, very smart guy.
One of the first racing gloves is no more than a golf glove. Yeah. And the reason my daddy liked that, he'd get a left and a right. You get a better feel of the car. Mm-hmm. Is why he liked that. And if you didn't do that, when after the race, you look at your hand, it's blister on top of blister that had busted by Tuesday, Wednesday before you could do much with them again.
Because back then they didn't have
you had to fight them because they jump off the ground. This the cutters all need. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And this would come down again, either by drill, stick it into the valve seat of the guide of the block and cut this. Here's one for intake, one for exhaust. See.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's very simple. Or you can take a ratchet and turn it around there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that one looked like you wouldn't want to spin it too fast. It might chatter.
That's right. That's right. Just go down in the valve guide in that block and just make contact with you take the valve seats out of them because you put Lincoln Zephyr valves in, which was larger than the stock flathead forward valve. And you put the bigger valve in. I got some bigger valves, but we won't mess with that. Eventually, in my day, we started using titanium valves, and doing different tricks with them. We know so much more now. But those engines back in those days, probably stock without any methanol nitro, was probably making, I'd say, 175, 80 horsepower because they was hopping them up with more compression. And the thing about it, the compression, if you ported them, you lost compression. And it was a trade-off, but finally, when they put methanol to it and nitro, it hopped them on up. I don't know what they was making, but it's probably 2.5, 275 at least. And the car weighed 2,700 pounds bone stock, and they'd lighten them up more than that. But you could probably, you put more nitro to it, but you didn't have the rods that was standing. It didn't break the rod. Now, the Ford rod, you could put it in the vise and put a bar through it and twist it. It wouldn't break, but it'd break the rod bolt nuts, The rod bolts were cast in. It was part of the rod, which is, I never seen that before until a flathead Ford done it. And I didn't realize it was like that until I started building my own later on. My daddy, of course, I never paid much attention what he did, but I was watching him one day, and he'd move that crank back and forth, then he'd take the bearings out of it and peel them with a piece of glass, and then polish them, put them back in there. So I had to do it the way he done it and run my finger down in between the counterweight and the pan rail of the block. He turned it backwards, get my finger out. I went away just to sling my hand. Oh my God! Oh my God!
I bet so, man. I've got an inline or a straight 8, 47 Buick that I got to put together, but I can't find the main cap. So.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, that's kind of a major part. Not
still just go buy. Main caps were made over.
It's not like you can just go and pick up some main caps for it.
Well, you said inline straight 8. The ATU agents used a lot of them back in the day. They would run fast.
Okay.
And would outrun a flathead Ford unless the guy knew what he was doing. That's it. Yeah. But
so these flathead Ford parts and things you're showing me are a lot of what they run in, like the old tractors that I have.
Yeah, I mean, they back in those days,
50s,
they made handmade stuff so much, and gosh, what we can do today, we can make a lot more horsepower out of them. And of course, what we do, camshafts and stuff, the cams that they used back then are still the best cams.
Oh, is that right?
The 1016 Escadarian is one of the best cams ever made.
Well, and speaking of cams, I'm going to have you tell a story about Tracy's grandfather.
Oh, boy, I'll do that.
Willie Thompson, because I know her dad's tuned in, Kenny Thompson.
There is
Hopefully we'll get over here and see him
big
soon.
cap to hold them
Him and
together.
Jackie. Oh, yeah, that's it.
And I got some that runs bolts in, it's like blades,
Yeah.
tied all together.
Okay.
But you got to make a horsepower with a flathead Ford. As Mr. Thompson will tell you got to hold them together.
And those are obviously made aftermarket elsewhere. Made
You
not
need
from the
another
stock.
commercial. You'll go ahead and tell the story about Mr. Thompson.
Yeah,
Do
that'd
you
be
need
great.
a commercial, babes? What
No,
he's
we're
asking?
good. We're good.
Okay.
Roll.
Like I say, my dad and I used to go by there. I'd be riding with him. I was like a shadow to my dad, Can I go? Can I go? Yeah, come on. And you'd be surprised how many times I made a liquor run with my daddy. Mm-hmm. And I got tales about that too, but won't tell them today. But anyway, Mr. Thompson be in there and sat down in a chair, have a towel over his knees. He'd have a couple files, and some sandpaper. And what he was doing, he was getting that 404, I believe it was a 404 Escadarian cam, which is a radius lifter cam. And a radius lifter is a poor boy's roller lifter, but some of those cams ground. And I guess when Harry Miller bought the Offenhauser, he couldn't afford to make the rollers, so I think Mr. Winfield suggested he use a radius lifter, and he'd grind him one. So that's how that come about. And I've got some of those today, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sure, I'll show them to you sometime.
Yeah.
But anyway, there he is, that camshaft. And he's over there at that shop, Shimon Thompson, and he's whittling away at that camshaft. What he's done, he's made him a pattern out of cardboard, and he's got the mics there. He's got several camshafts there. And he'll go to that bench grinder and true it up, and he'll walk up to it and rotate it. And what he's doing is grind on the heel of it. Now he'll go back over there and sit down and start finishing that cam off. And then he'll get sandpaper. He'll start probably 80 grit and work his way up to 120 and so on and so forth. But he regrinds that cam. It may take him all day. It may take him 2 days. I visualize it probably take him 3 days because I've never done that, but he spent a lot of time making them cam shafts. Now you got to remember, the cams back then, as far as heat treatment's concerned, I guess really when you put two metals together and you put the right oil to them, it heat treats itself, powerizes itself, is what it does. And Dave would know about that. And so they didn't wear out no quicker than the normal cam would. So that's the way he made his cams. I never seen anybody do that to this day, but that was the way he done that, and he actually done that. And a lot of people knew about it too. And Larry Wallace over at Hamm and Moody he's probably worked at Hamm and Moody longer than anybody ever.
Yeah.
And he knows about that, and he got a lot of old cam shafts from, I think, Mr. Thompson, and he was telling me about it also. But my daddy and I actually saw that, and he got up and laid it down. We showed up because he talked to my daddy. So he tried to drive. I think he took the car out one time, and Buddy Schumann gone somewhere else to race, and Willie tore that car up. I don't know what Buddy said to him when he got back, but
I have the article from that in the paper. Was it at the Metrolina? Was it some kind of fairground?
Oh, the one where he got in a bad wreck?
Yeah.
And that was pretty much the end of his career. I guess.
He says he thinks he'll stick to mechanics.
Yeah, that's it.
But I tell you, he was a very, very smart person. Really, really smart.
So that was the shop on,
as I know it, over there on Main Street. I call it South Main Street.
So you used to pass through there, and you would stop in.
If you was going to South Carolina, you had to go by there, run Spartanburg or Greenville.
Okay.
Go right by it.
Yeah.
You had to.
And that was it had his name on it too.
It had Schumann Thompson on it, on the side of the cars. It's right on Main Street. In fact, when one of those cars that Buck drove, the '87 car, they won a lot of races in a row, 26, 7, 8 races in a row. It might have been Metroliner, but Buck and Ike Kaiser wanted to buy that car, and Buddy didn't want to sell it to him. And Ike had a car. I think a guy named Mickey Flynn drove it. And if you remember, Kaiser and Schumann at one time were partners. If you wanted to buy like Elbrock cam or Escalator and cam, you could talk to either one of them about the cam because he hung out over there. He had a record service, Ike Kaiser did. And at the Charlotte racetrack, you always saw him there with them pretty records of his. Really nice guy. And later on, he and Buck and Roby Combs, I believe, went together, and they rented one of them, or at least one of those racetracks over there. I don't know which one it was, but anyway, they were together. They bought that car finally. They showed up over there one day, and Buddy said, "Give me you know what monies," and they had a sack there and counted it out. So he took his foot and put up on the front of that car and pushed it backwards, and it rolled out of the shop, across the sidewalk entrance, right out into the street. And they had to run out there and get it because the cars were dodging it, you know. That's how they bought that car. But he didn't really want to sell it, but they kept after him.
That's funny.
And they repainted the quarters on it, and then they put Kaiser Special on it, as I remember. And Buck still drove the car.
So Buck Baker, my dad told me he grew up down there off of Glenwood Drive or whatever in that area. And he told me, he said Buck Baker used to pick him up in the city bus and like drop him off somewhere downtown, some park or whatever, and then he'd come back and pick him up later. This would have been back in the 50s at some point.
Right.
So Buck Baker was a bus driver.
When they got in qualifying, something like that, the bus driver going to take her out and qualify it now.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
okay.
That's what he did.
How about that?
Yeah, he was known to that. And then his wife, I still remember her, she would always stand on the run board, just jump up and down in the infield, and you better not touch Buck Baker because if you come back in, she'll whip you.
Oh, really?
It won't mess with her.
Oh, man, that's good stuff.
Now, another thing that they did, you know, back in those days, everything you did was new. I mean, like, you're talking about the real pioneers. You're talking about those guys.
Mm-hmm.
And Schumann, Thompson, my daddy, Bill Sockwell, Bud Moore, Red Vault, Bob Osicki, Joe Wolf, just on and on. Very smart people. With the education that they did have, or didn't have, one of the two, but they had it between the ears. They used their brain.
Mm-hmm.
And an engineer today is these guys that make hundreds of thousands of dollars for the race teams.
All right.
An engineer back in those days of my time growing up was somebody that run the railroad.
Yes, that's
no comparison.
That's what Sterling Marlin says still. He'll say train drivers.
Yeah, that's what they are.
He said it a couple weeks ago. I talked to him, and that's what he said.
That is true.
Yeah.
He's a trained engineer.
But that's what I say too.
Yeah.
But anyway, another thing they did, I mentioned to you about the High Point Speedway built in 1940, and they run in 1939, then run it in 40 and 41, and the war come, they closed it down. Mm-hmm. Well, Ted Horn showed up with a guy named Tommy Hendershitz, Shitz. They were from Indianapolis. Tommy was a corn farmer, but he's a hell of a wheelman on sprint cars. Mm-hmm. In fact, he won the championship several times. Well, they came up there, and my dad's always over seeing what they're doing. He wanted to talk to them and meet them, and they come to run the Greensboro Fairground too, is where I met Tommy Hendershitz the first time. And my mother was with him. She said them was the loudest, noisiest thing she'd ever heard in her life, and that'd been 1930. Well, my daddy got to look at them cars, and they were changing the gears in them. And what he was watching was taking that cap off the spur gear housing and taking them little gears out of it and putting more in it. And my daddy said, "What are you doing?" And I'm just paraphrasing the conversation I know that he had with them. And they told him, "Where do you get them?" "Philadelphia, Pennsylvania." "Who from?" "The Ambler brothers." They made them. So guess what? My daddy went up there. He called up and went up there and brought the stuff back. And what you did, now this would have been your first quick change rear end. This would be 1946, then 1947.
About that.
And right after the war. See, these boys made it through the war. My daddy worked at the shipyards up there building battleships. They were, man, I mean, they were ready to go.
Yeah.
I mean, you know.
Sure.
So he come back with a whole trunkload of stuff. He got him a Model A Ford rear end, took the horns off of it. That's them things that run out to the hubs. The horn, that's what we call them. Mm-hmm. And some people made bucks out of them. Well, he turned the rear end upside down. It had a 411 in it. And today they still use a 411 in the quick change. You get that at 486.
Yeah.
And then he went to a bread company and had a wrecked truck and got the rear end off from under it and cut the ends off of the stubs, the horns, and weld them to the horns of the Model A. And then that allowed him to run the floating hubs. And then he got 3 axles, 2 live axles, 1 spire, and they cut it for a cap. To tow it, you had to take one of the axles out and put the cap on it, so the grease wouldn't run out of it. Then you could tow it without the rear wheels. So one of them had to give if you go around a corner, and that just ended up tearing stuff up.
Yeah.
And they had a spool, but first, before they had spools, they were welding or brazing 3/8 bolts in the teeth so they couldn't turn and lock it up. Mm-hmm. And that ended up shearing your keys and your hubs and so forth. But those short-lived, that's the way you get around a racetrack with both wheels pulling, live wheels, live axles.
Yeah.
So he made that thing. Took him 2 weeks to do it. And I've got a primitive one in the shop today like he made. And he said it took 2 weeks to make that thing. He made some and sold them. And then it wasn't long that Hamm and Dunaway were selling them too. They started making them. But that's one of your first quick changes. I know Joe Wolf was at Wilkesboro, and he come running up to the judges stand there and asked Frank Smith, the announcer. Frank was my brother-in-law. He married my oldest sister, Pat. And Bill sat on the pole up there that day, and he come running down there and asked Frank, said, what in the world's he done to that car? And Frank said, well, you go talk to him. I don't know. Well, they went up there and looked. The first thing he noticed was the hubs were different on it. Then he crawled under and seen what he'd done. And the rest of them did too. But as I say, everything was a new day back then. Mm-hmm. And others come up with stuff too that's not been seen. I know Ford visited Red Vault and discussed the cylinder blocks. I know they visited with, they brought Andy Granatelli up to Ford Motor Company, and he told them what's wrong with the blocks. Now, Andy told my daddy that and what they had done. See, they offset the crankshaft to one side in a flathead Ford motor. And that was to take the slap out of the piston noise, Mm-hmm. Cars, back in those days, they would offset the pin so that they wouldn't slap when the engine was cold.
Yep.
Well, if you turn them around, the motor run faster because of less friction, drag.
Yeah.
And my dad used to know, somebody at Ford told him how much friction was in a flathead Ford motor, and that was the #1 culprit of robbing horsepower. So they did everything they could do to relieve that.
Because you have a major thrust and a minor thrust side of the piston.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so the banks were different. There's a degree and a half difference from side to side. I mean, it's impossible to, if you wanted the camshaft to be perfect, you had to grind it that way because the timing needed to be advanced on one side and retarded on the other side. Think about it. Mm-hmm. So what they did on split overlap is where they set the cams. And never did, the cam manufacturer opened it 30 degrees before top dead center and closed it such and such degrees and so on and so forth. Well, with a flathead force that time, you had to grind the end of the valve stem to set your clearance, which, that took a long time to do it. Then they started making adjustable lifters, Johnson Company did, and you could drill a hole in the boss of the lifter bore and run it into the lifter and lock it, then take and turn it to where you want it.
You brought some of those, didn't you?
I did over here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to get them, I'll show them to them.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, one of the things I meant to bring was my daddy's original degree wheel.
Oh, yeah, degree wheel would be
It's
nice.
a little open house one about this big around.
Oh, really? That's why
Yeah.
I want to see it whenever we come out there to see you. Then let's see that.
This is an adjustable lifter. Is it on?
Yeah, it's on. Here, actually, switch to this one now, and I'll show
This
you.
one?
This one
right here.
This is adjustable lifter. That's a Johnson. It's sort of heavy. This is one like I use. It don't weigh nothing, like a piece of paper. See how it's hollow drilled and all? I mean, that's hard to do, but that's what you do. But what they did on split overlap, you got, if you put a cam in that's split overlap on, what it is, the piston's at top dead center on the overlap stroke, and both valves are the same amount of distance off the seat. If one's 100, the other's 100, and the piston on top dead center, that means that cam is in that motor at split overlap. So if you set your valves on split overlap, you can get them right. And what you want to do, they found this out, and I don't know how they done it, probably trial and error. There's no telling how many times I've seen my daddy pull a camshaft out. I've seen him take and walk a tree with one of them. He didn't like it. He beat a tree up with it, try to break it. And if it wasn't a 32 Ford, you could break them. 32 Ford was a solid billet. But anyway, if you're going to run a short track, you want the intake leading the exhaust like 30, 40 thousandths more off the seat. If you go to like Daytona, run down there, 4 mile course, 4.1, the old Daytona track, you'd put it on split overlap. Is what you do. If you're going to run bomb with salt flats or whatever, you might retard it a little bit. But that's why they did it. They didn't worry about nothing else.
Yeah, to get more torque, get more horsepower.
You can move your range around. That's what they were doing.
Yeah.
But the boys that built them flathead Ford motors, if you go back and look, Vaught, Osiki, Joe Wolf, they were very successful. A lot of stuff that they did applies today, and they originated a lot of it. And as I say, airflow through the motor. My daddy used a water hose instead of a flow bench.
Yeah.
I mean, you can tell what's going on. See those heads? If you look, all of the airflow comes out the front of the valve towards the cylinder. They don't go out the back of it. Now, on old head motors, they're different. You want to use all the way around the circumference of that valve for your airflow. And the same thing with exhaust. You can push it out of there. But now, see, what a lot of people don't understand, they think them pistons suck that air and fuel in there. Don't. When that piston drops off top dead center, there's a void there. It's low pressure, and air rushes in. I think at sea level it's 7 point something pounds.
It creates a difference in atmospheric pressure.
Yeah.
It's like a carburetor never sucks. It's a difference in atmospheric pressure when you open that throttle.
So that brings the question in: how is it that the barometric pressure affects it?
Barometric pressure, when you run a dyno, you call the airport and give them a number, and they tell you the barometric pressure. You use that as a factor in when you figure out your horsepower dyno. On your dyno, of course, the higher or lower, the lower the pressure, the more horsepower you can make. But to get you compare apples with apples from dyno to dyno, that's what you use. And you can always, that's a correction is what it is. I believe that'd be about right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Do you have your barometric pressure on your little
you got the
clean tech weather
you got
thing?
your fuel to air mixture ratio and that type of stuff to consider too, and temperature. Does it have a barometer? Yeah, 29.41. 29 point something one.
I always call the airport to get mine.
Yeah.
That's what I did.
This is right here.
This is Papa.
Who knows?
This is Papa 404. That's what I do.
Papa 404.
But that's just some of the stuff, that cool. What we did then and what my daddy did then. Then we started a series some years ago, probably early 2000s, with a legendary Flathead Ford Race Association, which was racing the Flathead Fords in the 40 Ford Coupes, 39 Ford Coupes, and try to race it like we used to years ago. And you'd be surprised people love to come out and watch them run. It's a lot of fun. In fact, if you go to my page or YouTube, you can watch them in-car camera run.
So, Mr. Blair?
And where's that at? On your YouTube?
Bill Blair.
Okay. On YouTube.
Correct?
I just wanted to get this
Bill
right.
C. Blair. Okay.
Okay. Bill Blair on YouTube.
Okay. Bill Blair on YouTube. So.
And I believe there's a Facebook there also. It says Legendary Flathead Fords. You might pull that up too.
Legendary Flathead Fords.
Yeah.
Okay.
See some of them run.
So did you ever try to fly without a plane?
I did.
You want to tell us about it?
I might as well.
You might as well.
Well, here again, get back to the liquor days. Hugh Abercrombie and his family ran the theaters there in High Point. They were a customer of my dad's. And when they had a special, like when the Cowboys come to town, and there's going to be a big crowd there, they call my mother up to come and help, and I'd go with her. Or somebody was sick, they'd call her, will you come and help us? And I'd go with her, and I sat on the back row, and I'd get free popcorn. I couldn't wait, and candy and all. And, of course, they'd have the serials, and I'd watch them, and there's one particular time that they had the serial Batman and Robin flying through Gotham City. And Gotham City, young man, was in New York, and they were flying there with arms out like this, and the capes, they had capes on, and they're just whistling in the wind. And out there was the top of the Empire State Building, all that stuff is going right by it. I sit there watching all that, oh my gosh. And so, a week or two later on, my mother bought a new wax tablecloth, and so I asked her, I said, what are you going to do with that? I'm going to throw it away. Can I have it? Yeah. She didn't ask me what I was going to do with it. So I went and got me some kite cord and a pair of her scissors and made me a cave. Mm-hmm. And I'd run around the yard out there, run around that yard and jump up off the ground. Of course, I couldn't get no lift. Well, being a farmer, I looked down there and I set this dairy barn. God, it was a big one. Hayloft way up here. You get 70-some cows in that thing at one lick, you know. I mean, it was a big one. Mm-hmm. So I went down there and I went up into the hayloft, opened that door. I got back in there about 50 foot, and I come out that hayloft door just wide open. And as I jumped, I had a good head of steam. I put my arms out. And as I started going down very rapidly, I started flapping my arms a little bit faster and faster. Mm-hmm. And then I don't remember nothing until I woke up.
That's right.
It de-winded me, broke my nose, broke my collarbone.
Jeez.
I couldn't get to the house. I crawled up there later on. I come to. I laid out in front of the yard, help. She thought I was pulling a prank on her. So finally she came to see what's going on. She saw me laying out there, my face all tore up. She come around there and picked me up. And I'd be about 7 years old, you know, and threw me down on the bed there in the front bedroom, and we got a washcloth to clean my face up a little bit and called Dr. McCain. And he came with a big old Buick, black, with them rings in the fenders, you know, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. The three.
So he come there, and I still have my cape on. Yeah. He started laughing. He laughed and laughed. Well, he set my nose and didn't do anything about my collarbone, said he couldn't fix that. So my daddy drove up about that time. He'd been on a run somewhere, and he saw Dr. McCain's car there. He's come in and said, "What's wrong? What happened?" "Your son Billy here tried to fly." So he laughed for about 30 minutes. And so everybody that came for the next 6 months a year, they had to tell that story too. So everybody in High Point knew that I tried to fly.
Oh, I gotcha.
Hey, who was the guy that did a lot of trick shooting and stuff?
Well, I used to do that too.
Okay.
There ain't much I ain't done. Yeah, well, I had time with that. But anyway, I got into doing fast draw. Mm-hmm. I love the Cowboys. And you know, my wife, her great uncle was one of the Oldlingers, Bob, that got shot by Billy the Kid. And then one of my ancestors is Jesse James. Mm-hmm. So and I met all the Cowboys. They keep their horses out of bull barn at the farm, and they call us, "Can you bring them?" And you bring them down, and I'd watch them practice the horses and make them count how old they were and do all kinds of stuff. And then if I shake one of them's hand like last year, I wouldn't wash my hand for 2 or 3 days.
Aww.
And I got posters and stuff, still got all that stuff. I got a bullwhip that Lasteroo gave me, and I still got it. I got a knife that Duncan Ronaldo gave me, the Cisco Kid. Mm-hmm. And then I got some stuff that Sunset Carson gave me.
Wow, that's priceless.
But anyway, they were just my friends, and I was a cowboy at heart, and they were my heroes. That and my racing buddies. My daddy was my first hero. Then Bonnie Flock, Bob Flock. Bob was the better of the Flock drivers, and all of them were great. In fact, Bill France had 3 races one time on same weekend, same day, throughout different states, and Bob won one, Bonnie won one, and Tim won one. I think Tim won Greensboro Fairgrounds. I don't know who won the others, but or where they were at. My daddy won one of the 3 races that he had in Goble-Soseby. Won one down in I believe Georgia, Birmingham. I believe I ain't sure who won that, but anyway, my daddy won the one in Danville, and they'd done that several times. And Johnny Rogers from up in Delaware, New Jersey. He might have been part of that Garback racing team, but he won one of the 3 that they had on the same day. See, NASCAR never done that before. It was formed. 48 was the first time France ever run more than one race at a time. So he got to run 2, 3, and 4 races at a time. But Johnny Rogers, incidentally, was the guy that came to Greensboro Fairgrounds after the war to run over there. He had 2 carburetors. They was all looking at it, and France wasn't going to let him run it. And so he pleaded with him, said, "Look, I come a long way down to run. I ain't got enough money to get back home. I got to win a little money to get back home." So France went ahead and let him run. Next week, about all of them showed up with 2 carburetors. And that's the way it was back then. You know, it wasn't exactly monkey see, monkey do, but you had to take advantage of what you could. And that's why my daddy stayed on the phone talking to people throughout the country. He knew the players. He knew Ed Escuderian. And Ed Escuderian's still living, by the way, 93, 4 years old. Still remembers when dead. Yeah. And my daddy met Winfield. He run the SU1 Winfield Cam. Grand Corps run the SU1 Winfield Cams. But he met these guys, and much like today, you know the players in NASCAR today.
Yeah.
And he knew the players back then. And really, the Indianapolis guys and them guys out in California, that's where you learned your stuff.
Now, Iski Cams, I guess, still doing them. Yeah.
And then John Engel was back then, Red Wilson. Red Wilson later on worked with Bill Stropp, in the Mercury deal. And I think his wife remarried, and whoever she remarried to ended up running that company. I talked to him. I bought a cam from him. I like to try stuff, not try their cams, see what the difference was, see if they're running better. And we'd profile them just for the heck of it to see the comparison of them.
Did you mention that your dad ran the 53 Oldsmobile?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I didn't mention that.
I was going to say, I don't remember talking about that. But
Well, what he did there, if you got time, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
You got all day, all night.
We got a few more, about 4 or 5 minutes, I think.
Okay.
We can go over a little bit. We already went over, but we can go over
We'll go a little more.
Time flies, man, when you're having fun. I'm
See, he
telling
run
you.
Oldsmobiles. He didn't know about the Hudson Hornets. The Hudsons would outhandle Oldsmobiles called center of gravity. They just sat down on the ground. In fact, you stepped over in one, you sat on the ground just about. But Oldsmobiles higher off the ground. And they wasn't much into suspension. As I mentioned earlier, that Bud Moore was one of the first to start messing with shock absorbers. I know Rex White did later on in 60, 61 of the Chevrolets, but Bud really started it. My daddy and people like Red Vault did with the old flathead Fords by putting Lincoln Zephyr shocks on their race cars and take the regular Ford shock off and put 50-weight castor oil in it. But what they didn't know is that oil got hot, it would change viscosity. Regular hydraulic oil don't do that. But for 30 laps, see, main events then were 30, 35 laps, then sometimes 50 laps. But you could get by with it if you'd put 50-weight oil in it. But these shocks, you could hardly move them when you put that heavy oil in them. Well, anyway, he got that Oldsmobile. They built 6 O's in 1953, and he'd won a race in 1952 with O's. Won a race, it was at Lakewood Speedway, automatic transmission. O's was trying that S drive out. That was the trailer package to pull. If you camper up the mountains, through the mountains, they had S drive on. If it worked on a racetrack, you go down straightaway and you get to the corner, pull it down the S drive, it geared it lower, like shifting into third, and leave it in there and go through the corner, get back on it until you got up off the corner and shifted up. Well, they're having trouble with them, and they kept messing with them. My dad was experimenting for them, and he finally won a race for them down at Atlanta in 1952 with automatic transmission. Now, you guys that's read the books will read that Tim Flock said he won the first one in 1955 Key Kafer's car, but that's not so. Actually, that Oldsmobile was the very first one to win with a hydromatic transmission in NASCAR. And Buck Baker was trying to be the first. When Buck passed away, I was at the funeral over there talking to Buddy, and he said, the big number 2 said, y'all beat us to it, winning with a hydromatic transmission. Well, they call them hydromatics, but it had S drive on it. But anyway, in 53, Olds made 6 special cars for racing. They had Howard cam in it, had solid lifters, had adjustable rock arms on it. It had different valve covers. You had an option of 2 different carburetors, and one was a Rochester, I believe that was a Carter. And then they made the exhaust pipes for them to run out in front of the tires, rear tires. And they put them in the trunk. My daddy flew up to Willow Run and got his. Don Perkins, the engineer, come over and picked him up and carried him over, and they filled it full of gas. He drove it home. Stayed there about a week, and then we got in and drove to Daytona Beach. And the deal was, my daddy had lost a race down there before, running out of gas. And if you coming off the beach, the tires back in those days were about yay wide, and you could spin them. And coming off the beach onto the asphalt, you could spin them again. You just light them up. And of course, you downshifted to help slow it down. But Bonnie Flock was a hell of a driver. He come in them corner. He took off. Let's see. He won a race or 2 with O's in 52, so he got one of those cars. Herschel McGriff got one, and Frank Alford got one, and O's kept one. And I don't know whatever happened to it, but my daddy got what they call the Eskimo white. It had a little bit of green in it. So they took both carburetors and checked the fuel mileage on it, and he put the one that got the most fuel mileage. And then he said that he was going to short shift. He said, I bet you Fonny runs out of gas. Because Fonny likes to show off. I mean, he could back up what he done, what he said. He'd drive him sideways, in and out of a corner. And it didn't make any difference. He was a hell of a race car driver. I think he won about, 25, 6 races, something like that. Well, sure enough, Fonny run out of gas. And my daddy, he started 6th, qualified 6th. He'd pace one about every other lap until he got up behind Fonny. Of course, Fonny was a good bit in front of him. And Fonny run out of gas, about a lap to go. So my daddy cruised by and won the race. That's how he done it. But he predicted that would happen. Then they inspected it and drove the car back home.
Wow, that's cool. That's a great story. I'm sure you told that a few times.
Yeah, I can see it again. But I can see it in color. I mean, I was standing there and watched all that, and I knew what was going on, but I heard them talking about how they was going to do that race, what they plan to do.
Do you remember a Speedy Thompson?
Yep.
While we were talking about Thompsons, or we were talking about Willie Thompson earlier, and he raced, Tracy's grandfather. But I've asked her dad this question: whether you're any kin to Speedy Thompson, and he says no. He was from somewhere else, but it wasn't too far away, I don't think.
Well, there's other Blairs I don't think we can too, but when you go back to the archives and go over and do a genealogy, you probably find out across the pond with some kin somehow or another. But Roscoe Thompson, I believe, was Speedy and Jimmy's dad, and I think he took a car one time to try it out at the racetrack. Went by himself and he never showed back up. So he went looking for him, and he done found him at the racetrack. The car was on top of him. He couldn't get off from under it. It didn't kill him or nothing, but still it put him in the hospital, and he survived. But that's what happened to him.
Okay.
It's tragic.
Yeah.
That could be bad. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. I'd love to go another 2 hours, but we
could do it.
We got to.
We got the stories.
Yeah, we probably should go ahead.
I can tell you a lot more stuff. I'll sum it up like this, folks. The pictures back in those days that you saw were all in black and white. But my friends, I saw it in color.
Yeah. That's
I
awesome.
loved every bit of it.
I'll bet. That I always feel like man, what if I was around back in those days? But
well, I saw a lot of stuff. I've seen this, like seat belts put in cars with a stock seat, especially in the old Strictly Stock days and early Grand National. And when you turned them over, every time that car lit, your springs in that seat you're sitting in was strapped to would give.
Oh.
And every time you done that, you started coming up under that seat belt until you had enough else to grip you, and it tossed you right out the window of your door.
Oh, okay.
It killed quite a few people doing
that. So that's
that.
what happened. I used to see that a lot. They would fly out the windows.
And another thing I'll tell you right quick, Brother Joe, he's sort of like an Indian. He couldn't drink much. He liked wine. Well, he went up to Mount Airy, North Carolina, where we're going to be in September the 10th, folks. Mount Airy Moonshine and Racers Reunion.
Yes.
Be one of the best shows you'll ever attend. Be a lot of race cars sitting on the street up there. We had 90-some last year sitting on the street up there. And a parade out to the old racetrack, and then all the moonshiners were there. Big Chuck, Paul Murphy, and different ones. There'd be, I think Mark and Deary's going to try to come this year. And some of the distilleries will be represented up there. But see, we know that moonshiners helped start racing. Most of the old race car drivers, I can name you a dozen of them right now, that were started out moonshining, hauling liquor. But anyway, Joe went to Mount Airy, and he got to drinking up there a little bit, and he got word. They said, "You're too damn drunk. You can't drive that thing, man. Get out. Get away from here." So he went and got a boy named Cowboy Hudson. Cowboy's a big old boy, probably 260, 6 foot or so. Well, they tied him in there with a rope. 39 Ford. Nice 39 Ford.
Yeah.
And away they go in a heat race. And he turned it over in a heat race. And it landed upside down, stopped upside down. And so they run down there to him, and with his big belly, he couldn't find the knot in the rope to get it loose.
Oh.
So Joe whipped out a switch knife and started cutting on him to cut that rope in two so he'd get out of there. And Cowboy said, "Damn it, Joe, stop that. You cut me to death. You're going to kill me sitting right here." Somebody slapped Joe back out of the way and got the knife and went around where it hooked behind the seat to the floor and cut it. And then Cowboy fell out and hurt his neck when he fell out on his head. It was a fiasco, but wow.
Yes. Crazy
Stories.
stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've been around racing, and how many years now? So,
gosh, I never counted up, but let's see, 72 years.
70 something.
gosh, yeah. So there's bound to be
Now
quite
there's
a
some
few
years that
stories there.
I was a fleet truck manager for some companies that's what I did. Then I had my own truck leasing company, and I was in drag racing. I went all over the country drag racing, super stock and cars and match race cars and the Pontiacs certainly. But that was our hobby for a while. Sheila and I wore out the road there for a few years, from here to Texas up in New York and New Jersey, Illinois, just everywhere.
Yeah. Wow. What stories you could tell or you tell. And I'm glad you came up down to see us. And we had a few comments on here on our YouTube, but one of them was they were talking about the lug nuts. I think they're talking about the video that I showed before this show starts, and it shows the one I was telling you about beginning of the show.
All right.
The wheel Cronkite talking about the studs and the nuts and all that. We'll get into that stuff later on though, but we're also going to get into more stuff with Bill Blair eventually. I guess I'm going to come see you.
I want you to come up to the Blair's race shop.
Yeah.
And we really got some exhibits up there. In fact, we'll have one of the old original race cars sitting behind us, old 39 Ford that used to race. I got one 39 Ford that raced in Daytona Beach in 1953. It's still here. I save everything I can, don't throw nothing away. But but anyway, I want you, Tracy, to come up and be with us, and we'll talk about racing history, the way it used to be.
Very good. I'll just soak it in, and I'll just listen. I mean, I'm just having such a great time.
Well,
learning and listening.
David and Tracy, if somebody don't tell this story, we're going to lose it. And what I hate is, I know that the young guys has got to do this, but you can only learn what you read, and I can show you books that's wrong, flat wrong.
Sure.
But for instance, Tim Flock, first automatic transmission went in 1955. That didn't happen. Well, there's other stories like that too, but I tell you, there's like Soapy Castles.
Okay.
But Soapy knows, and he's going to tell you like I do, that ain't true. This is the way it was. Soapy got his name from Buddy Schumann, Soapbox Derby.
Oh, okay.
I think Buddy sponsored him. And so they nicknamed him Soapy. That's where he got his name from.
Instead of Neil Castles, it was Soapy was.
But he's a great guy too. He worked down at Fish Carburetor. He can tell you a lot about Bob Fish. And Speedy Spears, we just lost him. That's a treasure right there. We lost Speedy Spears here a couple years ago. And Johnny Thompson. There's so many treasures that we have lost in the past few years, and it's just fewer and fewer of us. I hate to say this, but Todd Morris keeps saying you're the last voice. Well, I hate to hear that.
Yeah, I know.
I don't want to be the last voice, Yeah. But I didn't see everything, but I saw a lot, and I tried to tell it the way I remembered, the way I saw it. And then would people come to see my father, and they'd talk about it. And then later in years and later in life, he lived to be 85 years old. I think he passed away in 95, and they would come over there and they'd get him on the radio and talk to him. WM Fort Wood, about the early days, who was the best driver. And he gave the Petties a lot of credit, what they did. See, Richard, we always say, my daddy and I, that Richard Petty did for racing what Arnold Palmer did for golf, sort of like that. And, of course, our first ambassador of stock car racing, and this is my opinion, would be Fonny Flock. He'd come to the races early, go to the radio stations, talk about it. He'd get on High Point Station there, WMFR, and talk with Frank Smith and my daddy. See, Frank was working for Bill France too, an announcer. And everybody in the family at some point in time sort of helped out, And so he'd go to newspaper. Bill Curry was the sports editor for the High Point Enterprise. And then for stock car racing in general, I would say Ted Horn was probably the first ambassador. I believe he's the first one to start any type of charity work for, people. But Ted Horn, my daddy, that was his hero. That's the reason he was car number 2, and he had the same style of fonts that Ted Horn used. Because Ted Horn made a big impression upon him when he came to High Point Speedway in 1940. And my daddy met him. That's how my daddy ended up meeting some of the other people and getting the quick change rear end and a lot of other stuff he learned from. But just wish I could relive it again. I ask a lot more questions, so I'd be a lot smarter too,
I understand, yeah. So I like to learn from you. Yeah. So maybe someday I can be telling the same stories. Hopefully.
Keeping
That's
history
my plan.
alive.
That's it.
You can. Yeah. Well, you can. Let's see, you started back what year?
Even though I didn't see it in color, I started in racing in the end of 94 season. Okay. But I grew up in Charlotte, and the furthest memory that I have back talking about NASCAR to where I can relate it to a particular date would have been mid-'70s, talking about David Pearson, who was my favorite driver then, arguing with a guy, Bubba Jones, on the school bus because he was a Richard Petty fan. And so I knew Richard Petty was winning all the time. And David Pearson was winning, but he wasn't running quite as much. But anyway, that was my favorite.
I remember when David started over at Charlotte, that number 3 car of Rafe Fox. I never knew all that much about Rafe Fox. Of course, he was a Florida guy, you know. But I liked him, and I knew he'd get the cars to run good. And he made a big contribution to stock car racing, you know. He really did. But I know in later years, my daddy would go over to Richard Childress's, and they want to hear the early stories. He'd go over to Billy Hagan's or Turley Bonnie, and one time Sterling Marlin was over there driving for him, and they wanted to tell a story. They loved that old racing. And I heard a lot of stuff, and then you ought to hear my daddy and Lee Petty, and they used to get together and talk about the early days, and my daddy and Jimmy Lou Allen about the early days. And that book Greg Fielding wrote, the first 40 years of racing, Greg stayed on the phone with them just about 5 days a week, getting stories about what happened in Canfield, Ohio, or wherever they raced, you know. And they remember a lot of that stuff. But only a few people has ever made an effort to record that stuff. NASCAR never kept much as a record back then. But I know I could talk on and on about this stuff, and I'm sorry I've spent a lot of your time here. I hope you got something out of it.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Loved it. Absolutely. Yes. And we'll get together and we'll talk about that. But thanks everybody for tuning in. And we had a few questions or a few, let's see. Jim Dooley says, awesome show, Hamm. You should definitely go out there and do a video in his shop. I'll have to do that. And he also mentioned, do you think the fence climbers also started out as moonshiners? Talking about Dickie Dennis. So he's the one that climbed the fence in 2014 at Richmond, you know. We've talked about him. So anyway, there's a lot of different.
You were reading it
so
with your
if
eyes
you're,
closed.
well,
That's why I was looking at you funny.
I have the cataract in this eye, and this eye is like from here I can see. This one's pretty much anyway. Working on that.
My cataract story.
I'm gonna.
She said,
they removed mine with no Novocaine.
Oh no.
No Novocaine.
Well,
they just did it.
I got to tell this.
Yes.
I'm gonna do it anyway, Sue. Well, I went to get my regular eye exam, and he said, "You know, I told him I could not read the letter in the trailer there on the bottom of the TV. It's blurry." So he got up and I said, "You got a hint of a cataract?" And I said, "I ain't gonna get no better reading." He said, "No, but I can write you a prescription." I said, "What we got to do to fix it?" He said, "Well, you're gonna have to get a new lens. You're gonna have to replace it." And so
that's what I did in my right eye.
I said, "What can we do then?" He said, "Let me see if you qualify." So he checked, and yeah, you'll qualify. I said, "Well, how bad does it hurt?" "Oh, it don't hurt. Don't take them 10 minutes. You won't feel nothing." So he set me up a deal, you know. So I went over to Thomasville, and come my time, I went in that room, you know. Well, the meantime, this guy come with a tray and give me some anesthesia, you know. So go in there and they strap you down, put this gown on, you know.
Yeah.
And all you can see is your eyeball. And he said, "This don't hurt. Don't worry about a thing. Relax." So, boy, he started tearing that lens out of there, and I felt everything he done. But I didn't want to move because they thought I would be a wussy, you know. So I bared with it. And I left out of that place. I wheeled you out there in a wheelchair. She picked me up. I said, "Does that look like I've been hit with a ball bat over here?" She said, "No." And I said, "It feels like it." So they give you those drops, you know, in your medicine. So after that thing quit hurting, I went back to my regular eye doctor, and I said, "I see two of everything." He said, "I was afraid of that." He said, "What happened is your new lens and eye is overpowering your old one." He said, "You're going to have to get other than oh, no."
Oh, no.
So anyway, I was going to have to go through it again. So I showed back over in Thomasville, and you qualified, we'll do it. And they set a date, and so we went. So anyway, this guy come with that tray on wheels and this tank and everything, and he's going to give me some more anesthesia. And I said, "Sir, will you give me a double or triple dose of that?" "Why on earth would you want a triple dose of that, this anesthesia?" And I said, "Well, because last time I was over here, man, I thought they was trying to kill me back there." He said, "No, man. Oh, wait a minute. I'll be back in a minute." So he's gone about 5 minutes. Here he come back with some paperwork. He said, "Oh, yeah, sir, let me tell you what happened. We had 2 new interns mix the anesthesia that day, and they mixed it wrong."
No way.
So I survived that with just no anesthesia.
Oh, no.
That's not good. Hey, all right, Bryson, do we have some comments over there?
Yeah, put me on there real quick. There you go. Yeah, we got Todd Morris says there's nobody as passionate about accurately preserving the early days as Bill Blair, keeping history alive, and I'd have to agree with him. And we'll put that up there for you to read.
Good. Yeah.
Thank you, Todd. He's a good guy. Todd is.
Yeah. All right, Tracy. Any more that you want to read?
There's just banter back and forth between them.
So what you can do is after the show's over, go back onto the channel and you can ask questions, comments, or whatever, and I'll make sure that Bill goes on there, or I'll send him screenshots of them, whatever. So he'll see he's got his own YouTube, so he can go on there and answer your questions or whatever. All right, so go on there and do that. Make sure you hit the thumbs up if you like. If you don't like, hit it twice. That way it takes it off. Yes. Anyway. All right.
Well, thank y'all. I certainly enjoyed it. I really have, and thank you so much.
Yeah, we enjoyed it too. And Scott Trevison down in Daytona says, great show. So hopefully we'll see you back down there soon. But before that, probably, because we're talking about September. Oh, we're talking about going back down there in September possibly. But before, we got to make sure we don't go the same week that the Mount Airy thing's going on.
I don't know about the September deal.
Moonshine Racers Reunion, September the 10th.
Yes, okay. I remember what Janice said, that September they'd be open.
The boat show, that's in October.
Okay,
whatever.
Never mind. We'll talk about that later. All right, y'all have a great rest of the week. I don't know my guest for next week, but we'll get somebody as we always do. So y'all have a great week, and we'll see y'all next
time
Monday for Racing Roots with Hamm. We'll see you in March. Good night.
Yeah. At Drug, we are proud to say we have been caring for our patients in our community since 1996. Our pharmacy offers a personalized customer service experience you